American warplanes crashed, but all crews are reported safe. Now, meanwhile, China is calling for dialogue and an immediate ceasefire and urging its citizens to leave Iran. Japan and South Korea are also reviewing evacuation plans as tensions spiral. Equity markets skid, oil prices surge, and gold advances as a widening conflict in the Middle East leaves investors fearing for a drawn-out conflict. Singapore and South Korea agree to upgrade their free trade pact. That's among 6 new agreements to shore up supply chains, ease trade flows, and expand aviation ties.
I'm here at the Shangri-La in Singapore, where the Korea-Singapore AI Connect Summit has concluded. The two sides highlighted strategic alignment in AI, with the key outcome being a $300 million global fund designed to support cross-border
to space. Beijing's far bigger ambitions for space, all laid out in the government's latest development roadmap. Now, Israel says that the chief of Lebanese group Hezbollah is now a marked target for elimination and that all options are on the table for a ground invasion but has no immediate plans. This comes as U.S. President Donald Trump vowed to avenge the deaths of American troops in the expanding war with Iran, and as Tehran steps up retaliatory strikes across the Middle East. Now, Israel's military intensified attacks on Lebanon today in response to Hezbollah firing rockets and drones across the border. Iran also targeting U.S. assets based across the Gulf to avenge the killing of its supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. Gulf countries, including Bahrain and Qatar, have reported intercepting Iranian projectiles. A U.S. airbase in Kuwait was also targeted. Casualties are on the rise. Iranian NGO Red Crescent said that more than 550 people have been killed in the country since the start of the war. Death tolls have also been recorded across the region in the Israeli city of Beit Shemesh and Beirut as well. And one Chinese national was killed in Tehran. Now, the head of Iran's Supreme National Security Council said today that Tehran will not negotiate with Washington. And Blake Sifton is following developments for CNA from Dubai, and he joins us now live. Blake, so Israel, well, they vowed to expand its strikes on Lebanon following attacks by the Hezbollah. What do we know about that so far?
Good evening. That's right. We've heard from the chief of staff of the Israeli military, Eyal Zamir, and he has said that Israel will embark on a multi-day offensive in Lebanon. As you say, at this stage, it's unclear if ground troops will be involved in that, but it is not beyond the realm of possibility. Israel also says, of course, that they are targeting the head of Hezbollah, named Qassam. And they recently said that they targeted a senior Hamas commander in Beirut. They did not name that commander or say if he was successfully killed or not. But of course, the situation there really is escalating. Now, what's interesting is that Hezbollah took this major step of firing on Israel for the first time in over a year since the ceasefire was reached with Israel in November 2024. They didn't join in the June war, the 12-day war in June between Israel and Iran. Of course, it's understood that they were severely weakened by their own war with Israel and weren't trying to provoke a response. But now they have responded. They have fired on Israel after Israel killed the supreme leader of Iran. And now, as we discuss, Israel is carrying out widespread strikes in Lebanon, but Hezbollah hasn't fired again. They attacked early this morning for the first time in a very long time, but they are not carrying on with those attacks. So it's unclear if that was a one-off, a symbolic strike, essentially, to protest the killing of the supreme leader of Iran, or whether they're keeping their heads down, whether they're having trouble mounting more attacks under fire, or whether they plan to continue firing on Israel. That remains unclear, but what is clear is that Israel is fully engaged in attacking Hezbollah assets in Lebanon.
Well, now, as tensions spiral, Blake, we're also hearing that there are strikes reported across Gulf nations. What are some of the latest developments there?
That's right. So after an overnight lull in which there were no strikes here in the UAE, and quiet around much of the rest of the Gulf. They did renew this morning here around 9 a.m. local time. We heard 2 or 3 echoing booms in the air. Those would likely be interceptions. Unclear if it was drones or missiles. There's been no reports of damage or injuries from those. There was also explosions, interceptions reported in Doha, Qatar, as well as Bahrain. But the main situation today has been in Kuwait, where smoke was seen rising from within the U.S. Embassy compound by witnesses. Again, it's unclear if that was a direct hit with a drone or missile or whether that was flaming wreckage that fell in the vicinity of the embassy. And there's another situation ongoing in Kuwait, which is quite unclear but very significant. The Ministry of Defense has said that several U.S. warplanes have crashed in Kuwait. Video on social media showed jets falling from the sky on fire, along with pilots parachuting out, and the Ministry of Defense said that the pilots survived. Now, it's unclear how many planes were involved and what kind, and it's absolutely unclear at this stage what brought them down, whether it was Iranian fire, friendly fire, any number of other things. But this is significant in the sense that these would be the first planes to crash, and in that 12-day war in June, no Israeli or American planes went down.
All right, many thanks for that update. Blake Sifton reporting for CNA from Dubai. Now, beyond the immediate region, the war is adding strain and uncertainty to global economies. Against this backdrop, China reiterated a call for diplomatic talks and a halt to the fighting, while urging citizens to evacuate from Iran as soon as possible.
中方对当前局势深表关切，坚决反对在国际关系中使用武力，侵犯别国主权安全。当务之急是立即停止军事行动，防止战火蔓延和外溢。中方愿同国际社会共同努力，积极劝和阻战，推动通过对话谈判解决问题，维护中东和世界的和平稳定。
The Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi has urged Iran to pursue a diplomatic solution as Tokyo takes steps to protect its citizens in the region.
現在のイラン・イスラエルの情勢を踏まえると、政府としては万が一の場合に備えて邦人の陸路での国外退避の準備を進めているところであります。邦人の安全に関わるため具体的なルートや時間の詳細について言及することは差し控えますが、イスラエルにおいては早ければ日本時間本日にも現地大使館が退避のためのバスを運行する予定です。
Over the weekend, South Korea urged for all parties to ease tensions. Seoul says it's closely monitoring developments and will take steps to protect its citizens, including evacuation plans if needed. Taiwan said it has no immediate plans to evacuate its citizens from the Mideast, as it says that Iran's retaliation remains focused on U.S. military sites and not against civilians. Right, a quick look now at regional markets amid rising geopolitical tensions. Stocks are falling as investors brace for a potentially prolonged conflict in the oil-rich Middle East. Markets in Tokyo, Taiwan, and Hong Kong are all deep in the red. And we're bringing you a detailed analysis a little later with Roland Lim. We've got more to unpack, so for more insights, let's bring in Mohammed Sinan Siech, a lecturer in international relations and politics at Wolverhampton University. Well, good evening, Dr. Siech. Thanks for joining us. So let's just start with the big picture question. Given just how widespread is retaliation by Iran, walk us through some of the implications in terms of global stability, especially in this region, if this conflict continues to broaden.
Yeah, so I think there are 3 different ways of looking at it, right? One, you would have to look at regional implications itself. This is within the Gulf. So the fact that Iran has been attacking targets within the Gulf nations as well, whether that's UAE, Bahrain, or any of the other nations, that starts
Condemn.
more.
It's now time for your business news, and Roland here is to tell us more about the widening conflict in the Middle East, and I believe it's rippling through the markets today.
Right you are, yes. Oil and gas prices surge, Asian stocks fallen, led by airlines and hotel groups. Safe haven gold also at a 1-month high. Now, oil prices are surging and are expected to continue their ascent amid fears of a major supply disruption after tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz largely came to a halt. Brent crude is currently up 7.9% in Asian trade. U.S. market West Texas is also up by 7.4%. This after rising by as much as 13% earlier. Now, on a normal day, about 1/5 of the world's oil supply passes through the strait, and this includes crude from Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iraq, Iran, and Kuwait. Now, tankers also carry refined products such as diesel, jet fuel, and petrol to major Asian markets, including China and India. But to cushion some of those disruptions, OPEC Plus has raised oil output by 206,000 barrels per day in April, which could help mitigate the impact on oil prices. Although the increase ends a 3-month pause in production hikes, it still falls short of expectations for larger output increases that had been discussed in recent days. Equity markets across East Asia sank as investors see no clear end to the Mid-East conflict. Tokyo ending the day down 1.35%. Taiwan's weighted index is also down 0.9. China's main stock indices, little change. Investor sentiment was on the mainland, supported by expectations that Beijing could step in to stabilize markets ahead of a key parliamentary meeting later this week. However, Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index, which has more global exposure, it fell about 2%. Gold, a key go-to in times of turmoil, climbing 2%. Silver on top of that,
the game is lagging.
About
My
the same,
supplement computer is
1.69
too hot.
in the green. US dollar also seeing a boost from a rush into safe havens. The rush to the yellow metal speeds up capital outflows from the crypto market, just as more traders thought a Bitcoin market bottom could be nearing. The cryptocurrency continued its slide again today. Other cryptocurrencies also following lower this afternoon. Airline stocks took a battering as they were forced to cancel flights to the region, and there are concerns that surging fuel costs and airspace disruptions would hit the travel sector. The Cathay Pacific sank 3% or 3.9% in Hong Kong today. Sydney-listed Qantas diving 5.4 into the red. Singapore Airlines is off by 4.7%. Japan's ANA Gel also falling by more than 5%. Energy producers, by contrast, gaining as surging crude lifts the outlook for revenues. Now, PetroChina adding almost 4% in Hong Kong. Inpex in Japan was up more than 6%. The prospect of increased spending boosting defense firms. Japan's Hosoya Prio Engineering, well, that surged by as much as 9.7%. And just China's J-35 stealth fighter maker Avic Shenyang rising more than 5%, while drone maker Avic Chengdu rocketing nearly 20%. Shipping stocks rising as expectations grow that the conflict would force businesses to rush to secure alternative routes to the Straits of Hormuz, even at higher shipping costs. Japan's Kawasaki Kaisen rising nearly 6%, China's COSCO Shipping Energy Transportation gaining 9%, and Taiwan's Evergreen Marine advancing 6.6%.
Markets, of course, reacting after U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iran, and investors are watching one place on the map, and that's the Strait of Hormuz. Well, Roland is here to tell us a little bit more about why this narrow channel, why is it such a big deal?
Well, the Strait of Hormuz is basically a choke point. I mean, literally, because at its narrowest, it's only 33 kilometers wide. So any security scare could actually choke off traffic very quickly. Let's pull up a map of the region. The Straits of Hormuz sits between Iran and Oman, and linking the Persian Gulf, of course, to the Arabian Sea. It is the most critical choke point when it comes to global oil and gas trade, and it handles some 20%, as I just mentioned, of global oil consumption.
So elaborate a little bit more about the energy. Walk us through what are some of the numbers we are talking about?
Yeah, they're enormous. I mean, the U.S. Energy Information Agency, it reckons that flows off through the Straits of Hormuz is something like 25% of global seaborne oil trade, 20% for LNG gas. So that mainly comes from Qatar. So Another estimate I have for you is from the global commodities data provider Kepler, and they say that in 2025, 416 million barrels of oil traveled through the straits daily. So we're talking roughly about 33% of the global oil trade. We're talking about 20% of LNG.
Those are pretty impressive, massive numbers. So who's going to be most vulnerable if this thing tightens?
Yeah, by a long shot, it will be Asia. Why? Because it's estimated that 84% of all that traffic lands up in Asian shores. And the biggest markets would be China, India, Japan, and South Korea, who all also rely on LNG. And that's why the disruption, when it happens, could become a global problem. Of course, surging oil prices means that expectations of higher inflation. Higher inflation means that there's increased risk of a recession, and also, for example, the US Fed won't be able or won't have room to bring rates down. And that could, if this situation plays out longer, it could exacerbate a global recession.
So I know, Roland, this sounds like quite a basic question, but still quite an important one. But why is it that oil producers can't just simply pump more in order to offset the demand?
Yeah, two problems. First off, the excess capacity globally actually is in the Gulf region. So they have to bypass, they have to go through the Straits of Hormuz, which brings me to my second point. You would be asking then, why can't we bypass the Straits of Hormuz? Well, that's because most of the capacity for these oil producing states are actually in the region itself. I mean, it's estimated there could be something like 216 million barrels of oil that could be diverted through pipelines past Hormuz, but that's still very little as compared to what's actually needed. Sorry, 2.6 million barrels, I said 260, that's correct, you're wrong. 2.6 million barrels. Remember I said earlier, 14 million barrels a day, right? So it's a drop in the ocean. And also countries like Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, they don't actually have alternative pipeline routes that doesn't involve not using the Straits of Hormuz.
What about governments, though? I mean, if they step in, what can they do?
Well, governments have reserves. The U.S. reserves, has critical reserves. It's got the strategic petroleum reserves, which is something like 416 million barrels as at February, according to its energy department. But experts are warning, yes, governments have reserves, but it also depends on the scale and size and duration of this conflict. Stocks can buy you time, but that will dwindle down if this conflict becomes a much larger disruption for oil supply.
All right. And I know there's plenty to unpack here, but we'll leave things as it is for now. Thanks so much for your insights, Roland. Right, on that note, we are going to go for another break now, but coming up on East Asia tonight, South Korea's president unveils the Korea-Singapore AI Alliance. It's a partnership positioning artificial intelligence as a growth engine for both economies. This is East Asia tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Iran says it will not negotiate with the U.S., promising stronger retaliation after the death of its supreme leader. Tehran stepping up strikes across the Middle East, including Kuwait, where several U.S. warplanes have all reportedly crashed. Now, as tensions escalate, China urges dialogue and an immediate ceasefire and telling its citizens to leave Iran. Japan and South Korea also reviewing evacuation plans. And Singapore and South Korea are upgrading their free trade agreement, deepening economic ties in areas such as supply chain resilience, trade facilitation, and aviation maintenance, repair and overhaul. Well, it's among 6 deals exchanged during South Korean President Lee Jae-myung's state visit to Singapore. Prime Minister Lawrence Wong has described the country's partnership as critical in a challenging geopolitical landscape. CNA's Claudia Lim with more.
President Lee Jae-myung is in Singapore at the invitation of Singapore President Tharman Shanmugaratnam. They affirm what's been described as an excellent state of bilateral relations. During President Lee's meeting with Prime Minister Lawrence Wong, they agreed to explore deepening cooperation in AI, digital issues and cybersecurity. They then witnessed the exchange of several deals. One is to take the Korea-Singapore Free Trade Agreement to new heights. It was entered into force 20 years ago to the very day.
Over the past 2 decades since then, the global trading landscape has evolved significantly, with greater emphasis on supply chain resilience, digital trade, and the green transition. And so President Yi and I agreed to upgrade our FTA to ensure it remains forward-looking, relevant, and beneficial to our businesses and workers.
Other deals will see joint research and talent exchange in tech areas such as advanced manufacturing and other high-value sectors, and advancing green ambitions like in the study of the potential of nuclear energy. PM Wong also notes that people-to-people ties are flourishing.
Singaporeans are avid fans of K-drama and K-pop, and many travel to Korea to experience your rich culture and heritage firsthand. The Korean band BTS is performing here at the end of the year, and I understand that Singapore is their longest stop in Asia outside South Korea and Japan, so we look forward to welcoming them.
대한민국은 내년도 아세안 의장국인 싱가포르의 활동을 적극적으로 지원할 것입니다. 아울러 지난해 한 아세안 정상회의에서 천명한 CSP, 즉 꿈과 희망을 이루는 조력자, 컨트리부터 성장과 혁신에 도약된 스프링보드, 평화와 안정의 파트너십을 지향하겠다는 CSP 비전을 싱가포르와 함께 구체화하고 본격적으로 이행해 나갈 것입니다.
PM Wong says trusted and like-minded partners matter more than ever, especially in an increasingly complex world. Now, President Lee's visit to Singapore comes after both sides elevated ties to a strategic partnership in November last year. Earlier, President Lee and First Lady Kim also had an orchid named in their honor, the Vanda Lee Jae-myung Kim Hee-kyung.
President Yi also attended the Korea-Singapore AI Connect Summit, where both framed artificial intelligence as a shared growth engine for their economies. And there he emphasized that South Korea and Singapore have overcome structural constraints through innovation. And right, for the very latest, let's cross live now to Grace Shin, who is at the Shangri-La in Singapore. So Grace, can you elaborate a little bit more? Tell us how Singapore and South Korea stand to gain from one another.
Well, Tilly, South Korea brings industrial skill, deep semiconductor capabilities, manufacturing-based AI transformation, and significant investment in compute infrastructure. And this is going to be fostered even further with its AI push this year, which is backed by significant funding. The Lee Jae-myung government allocated a record $8 billion in direct AI budget expansion, alongside $23 billion for national growth funds targeting AI investment. So the government has also set up a national AI strategy committee, which elevated AI policy to deputy prime minister level, while signing cooperation MOUs with players including OpenAI, BlackRock, and NVIDIA. Singapore, on the other hand, brings regulatory clarity, global capital connectivity, and a position as a gateway to Southeast Asia's digital markets. In other words, Seoul is scaling hardware and industrial deployment, while Singapore offers governance stability and market access. And earlier, I spoke to Deputy Prime Minister Bae Kyung-hun, who also serves as South Korea's Minister of Science and ICT, and he described how those strengths align.
싱가포르이 세계 4위권의 AI 경쟁력을 가지고 있고 자체적인 AI 개발 역량 그리고 아세안 시장에 있어서의 굉장히 좀 교두보 역할을 할 수 있다고 생각합니다. 그래서 한국도 최근에 AI 경쟁력 4위, 5위권의 이제 경쟁력을 가지게 됐고 또 AI 파운데이션 모델 자체 경쟁력만 해도 세계 3위권의 경쟁력을 확보했다고 생각합니다. 그래서 한국과 싱가포르이 같이 힘을 합한다면 미국과 중국의 그 대등한 수준의 AI 역량을 우리가 확보할 수 있다. 이 부분을 가장 중점적으로 생각을 하고 있습니다.
Well, Grace, sounds like a memorable accomplishment from today's summit. So going forward, what can we expect?
Well, one of the most tangible outcomes today worth noting, and especially in order for us to forward plan, was the announcement of a $300 million global fund to be established in Singapore by the year of 2030. Now, the fund is designed to connect Korean startups with international investors and provide a platform for overseas expansion, particularly into ASEAN markets. And several memorandums of understanding were also signed today, such as in areas like autonomous driving and public safety, aimed at generating operational cooperation. And the Minister of SMEs and Startups of South Korea, Han Song-suk, highlighted the significance of the global fund.
첫 해외 글로벌 모펀드가 이제 싱가포르에서 결성이 됩니다. 3억 달러 규모로 결성을 하는데요. 이것의 의미는 저는 해외에 이제 투자를 좀 할 수 있는 기반을 만들고 이걸 통해 스타트업들이 사실은 여기 와서 글로벌 투자를 받고 싶다고는 하더라도 실제 한국 스타트업들이 어떤 기업들인지 알 수 없을 수도 있고 그래서 그런 부분에 한국 정부가 나서서 투자자들을 글로벌 투자자들도 모으고 또 한국의 투자자들도 모여서 스타트업들을 발굴하는 건데요. 이것의 좋은 예시는 사실 오늘 발표에 나올 앨리스라고 하는 AI 기업이기도 합니다. 글로벌 펀드를 결성을 했고 그 글로벌 펀드를 운영했던 게 버텍스라고 싱가포르의 딥테크 투자를 하는 그 이제 정부 운영사죠.
So, taken together, today's summit marks a shift from policy announcements to structured collaboration, and the real measure of success will come down to implementation, whether these agreements can translate into measurable projects and regional expansion over the coming year.
Hey, many thanks for that report. Grace Shin, live at the Shangri-La in Singapore.
Shangri-La in Singapore.
From virtual K-pop idols to interactive stories, technology is now changing how people work, play, and connect. Well, CNA's senior Korea correspondent Lim Yeon-suk takes a look at how artificial intelligence is reshaping daily life and culture in Seoul.
This is eternity. These idols don't have bad days or scandals. That's because they are a virtual group created using artificial intelligence.
K-pop 아이돌 씬에서 흔히 만들어지는 스타들은 10대에서 이제 20대 초반에 어떻게 보면 굉장히 매력적이면서도 불완전한 자아상을 가지고 있는 그런 사람 형태입니다. 이터니티라고 하는 프로젝트를 통해서 추구하고자 하는 것은 조금 더 영원하면서 아이디어란 모습으로 이 걸그룹이 남을 수 있는가 이런 부분들을 실험을 하고 있고요.
These virtual artists can sing and dance like their human counterparts. But in K-pop, their creators know what's crucial is to connect with fans.
팬들에게 본인의 생각을 자아를 가지고 말을 전달을 하고 노래를 작사하거나 작곡하거나 작사하거나 컨텐츠를 추천하거나 이런 간단한 그런 일까지 할 수 있는 그런 조금 더 추구하고자 하는 것은 리얼타임의 형태로 또 팬들이 만족하는 어떤 심미적인 비주얼 퀄리티로 이 아이돌들이 실제 사람과 얘기하는 것 같은 이런 라이브니스를 가지고 팬들과 소통하는 부분입니다.
Eternity is just one part of a bigger shift as South Koreans embrace AI for work and play. Written storytelling app Crack drops users into an AI-generated world where every decision they make writes the next chapter of their own personal story.
What AI does for you, though, is it rewrites the story or starts writing the story on the spot for you. So there's a predetermined universe here with some settings here and there. There's some characters inside that universe. But ultimately, there's a main character, which is you. And as you make your own decisions and choices, the story unfolds on the spot, just for you.
Yeah. It's
Eggy
a text-based app
game.
now, but Mr. E sees something much bigger coming.
When the latency problems or
Eggy's
cost
hoping hard with
problems
this
and
K-pop game,
some
bro.
minor detailed quality assurance problems get solved, the 3D models are going to get there. That way, it's going to be a fully immersive interactive story.
In this fast-changing AI environment, Professor Kim Hyung-jong, an information security expert at Seoul Women's University, warns some problems are emerging for society and especially for young people.
지금 고민되는 거는 딥페이크 이슈. AI가 만든 캐릭터가 특정한 개인을 연상하게 만드는 그런 상황이 되면 그것에 대해서 이제 사생활 침해가 될 수도 있고 그다음에 개인의 명예를 실추시킬 수도 있고 청소년들 같은 경우는 그 캐릭터들하고 상호작용하는 과정에서 제대로 못하는 그런 상황으로 좀 연결이 되지 않을까 우려 사항이라고 볼 수 있을 것 같아요.
South Korea has introduced an AI Basic Act, a governance framework requiring transparency for AI-generated content to prevent potential risks. But Professor Kim says legislation alone isn't enough. On the streets of Seoul, the pace of AI adoption is visible everywhere. South Korea has always moved fast, but keeping pace with AI may be its biggest challenge yet. Im Yeon-suk, CNA, Seoul.
And next on East Asia Tonight, we look at what some of China's space ambitions with CNA's Deborah Wong.
Here's a part of the 3A rocket system responsible for launching satellites and spacecrafts for China's lunar exploration program. Now, the point of this free exhibit to show that lofty ambitions can be within reach.
Oh my God, 20 stone.
China has listed aerospace development as a strategic priority in its 15th five-year plan. But what does it mean for the man on the street? And what will it take for these ambitions to lift off? Well, CNA's Deborah Wong tells us more.
From launches to returns, China's Shenzhou missions are widely televised, but less publicized, the rocket system that makes it all possible.
You're looking at what's left of the Chinese Long March 2F rocket, which launched 2 Chinese astronauts to space in 2016. Now you see the scratch marks and the scorch marks all across the body of the rocket. And that's a vivid reminder of the journey that it's undertaken. And here's a part of the 3A rocket system responsible for launching satellites and spacecrafts for China's lunar exploration program. Now, the point of this free exhibit to show that lofty ambitions can be within reach.
In January, the country's main contractor for space programs charted out its roadmap for China's 15th five-year plan. It will set up its space tourism system, build data centers in space, study space mining, and improve the monitoring of space debris and the removal. China hopes these plans can pave the way for international collaboration.
They need new frontiers in this sector to demonstrate that, okay, China is still leading or can be a leader in the space industry in terms of technology advancement.
Dr. Dong is part of an academy that fosters education in the space industry, an area in which private companies such as Changyu Space have been leading the charge.
我们2026年底是计划发射第一颗高轨的这个中继卫星，然后它会实现对于东盟地区整个的覆盖。就例如我们的东盟地区吧，它比如说有一些矿场的监测或者说一些远海渔业，它会涉及到一些信号无法覆盖的情况。
The Shenzhen-based company has its sights on the world. Changyu Space plans to build a satellite network that eventually offers coverage of the entire globe. And it's operating right here in Luowu District, the very place where economic reforms in China first took shape in the 1980s, opening the country to the world. 40 years on, it's transformed into an incubator of a different sort.
罗湖给我们提供了关于产业政策，还有我们的空间保障，还有我们的人才引进相关的优惠政策。再加上它对于我们的出海以及全球化有非常好的服务。
Changyu Space develops the software. 10 floors up, Magic Cube deals with the hardware. It set up China's first production line for solar arrays, which power satellites when they're in orbit.
尤其像我们所在的这栋楼呢，就叫罗湖区空天科技大厦。像毛卫星跟昌宇呢，其实有很多的一些业务合作，他们在做的一些事情呢，其实跟我们有很多的这种融合点最终呢，他们一些终端未来也可以应用在我们的卫星上，对，做一个真正的一个产业链协同。
Such buildings housing industry networks are blossoming across the country. There are now over 600 Chinese commercial space companies, with annual financing at over $2.5 billion last year. That's up 32% year on year. China's commercial space sector is estimated to be worth over $350 billion US. State media reported that at least 5 private rocket makers are eyeing IPOs. China's pursuit of space is now within reach for those outside of the industry. A Chinese startup sold tickets for a 2.5-hour flight to space for $430,000 US. The company says more than 20 people, including an actor, have signed up for the trip that will take place around 2028.
都是可以上太空旅行了，以前都想都不敢想的东西，现在都可以实现了。
我想看一下地缘说和地平说到底哪个是真的，哪个是假的，因为我没上过太空嘛，所以我也不知道这些理论是否是真的。
I wanted to cry. There was it's very touching because China came such a long way. From my parents' time, we have nothing. To see something like this, that we develop ourselves, I was just like walking here, just put tears in my eyes. You only have one choice. Either you're going to be walked over by everybody, okay, or you have to progress.
因为航天这个产业，它是一个高技术、高精尖的一个产业，它可以带动很多这个相关的专业的一个发展，像同时迭代很多的技术，所以对于我们的下一代的人来讲，其实它也会有更多的就业方向和就业机会。
The space race is on, and China is going all in, from the government to companies and private individuals, to secure a spot in the future economy. Deborah Wong, CNA, Shenzhen.
Well, for more on this, you're joined now by CNA's Deborah Wong reporting to us live from Beijing. So, Deborah, just a month or so ago, I believe Elon Musk, he declared that his SpaceX, they're going to be building data centers on space. And then what happened a week later was China responded and said, game on. So help us understand this space race and its importance for China.
So as we've seen in the 20th century space race, it's quite clear that space is really an arena for geopolitical rivalries on Earth to play out. So every new milestone really allows China to not just project power, but also to showcase its tech advancement and also sharpen its competitive edge. I give you one example. China had its Chang'e mission, and back in 2019, it actually launched the first ever spacecraft to land on the far side of the moon, and it really was the first ever country to achieve that. And within a few years, in 2024, it launched another spacecraft to collect lunar samples from the far side of the moon as well, really making China, achieve something that the US has not been able to do. And that really brings China also one step closer to mapping out lunar history as well as making new discoveries. And that's significant because up till then, China has always been trying to play catch up to the US. And those two missions really showed that China can be considered a serious contender in the space race.
And also, Deborah, not to mention that, these endeavors, they're super expensive. You must develop the tech. And not to mention, each time it fails, it also costs money. But winning this race is crucial, isn't it?
It's very crucial. I mean, absolutely. Space is a sector where those with deep pockets as well as a high tolerance for failure, that's essential traits to have because space really is a very vast, uncharted territory. So you need a lot of patience to try to get even close to reaching a milestone. Now, China, in naming space as a strategic growth pillar, we see Chinese political will translate to R&D subsidies as well as state investments, and all this money, they're flowing into Chinese companies, private companies like Landspace, which is currently developing China's first ever reusable rocket. And eventually, if that's successful, that paves the way for more sustainable launches on a larger scale. Now, US-based company SpaceX, that's run by Elon Musk, it's the first ever company and the only one in the world to do so far. And that's going to be putting US way ahead of China. So state subsidies aside, China's promotion of, private sector investments has also fueled the innovation drive. So you put two together, that really is building an ecosystem that creates opportunities to develop and to innovate. But that's really only the starting point, because when we talk about global supply chains on Earth and we translate that to the future of space, it's no doubt going to be internationally connected. Have a listen.
It's glitched.
Countries have to invest a lot on space if they want everything on their own. Right. And I don't think it's feasible for every country, because actually, as I said, space is a shared resources, and the infrastructure inherently can be shared for everybody. You don't want a satellite only service for your own country. You want it to be able to service for everybody else.
Yes.
We need multilateral or bilateral discussion, like to what extent can two countries or multiple countries can work together to spend least on investment on the infrastructure.
And that's where I'm hoping you help us answer that question, Deborah, because we do see international space collaboration, but given today's geopolitics, right? I mean, how feasible is it to continue fostering that?
So space is very closely linked to national interests like security, national defense, sovereignty issues as well, because many tech related to space, like satellites, they are dual use and they serve civilian needs like navigation. They also do serve military needs like intelligence. So export controls on such technologies really do limit cross-border collaboration. The US has banned NASA from working and sharing data with China, and Chinese nationals are also restricted from working in NASA. But partnerships in commercial space, that's one area where experts are saying could be possible for international collaboration. As it is, we already see some people sharing, multiple countries sharing data on climate monitoring, disaster report management. All these require the use of remote sensing data as well as satellites. So that could be a possible avenue. And for the mainland to do that, perhaps they could be tapping on Hong Kong as well, because the common law system is right there. And I spoke to one expert, Gary from Natixis, to understand more about this collaboration. Have a listen.
Hong Kong will have a role to play in finance, which is for sure, in collaborating between Chinese and international capital, or maybe an area for consensus in certain collaboration on technology. Maybe it can serve as like a hub globally for certain sectors, such as space. So we all know that SpaceX has many satellites in the world, and last year in December, China has also applied for a large number of satellites. So really, how to have like a rule-based system within this new area can be actually quite important.
So, Deborah, we know that China has poured in billions in this new frontier, but what does it mean for ordinary Chinese and also for its economy?
So we look at the big picture, right? China aims to achieve high-quality development in its commercial space sector by 2027. It's already listed space as a strategic growth pillar in its 15th five-year plan, which we will going to be which will be discussed in Beijing this week. And proposals since late last year already focus on strengthening national resilience in science and tech, boosting consumption. So we're going to see all those details being discussed this week. Now, local governments, we know, have already been encouraged to set up innovation centers to spur R&D, specifically for reusable rockets as well as smart satellites, as they pave the way, for potentially space mining, space tourism, and space data centers in the future. And all these ideas, they are expected to create new supply chains as well as pave the way for new career roads, not just in tech, but also in insurance, legal, financial services. And, they would eventually be creating jobs that we don't even know exist today. Oteli.
All right, thanks so very much for that story and that report. CNA's Deborah Wong reporting to us live from Beijing. And on that note, we wrap up this Monday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia, and you can find us on all the socials, Facebook and YouTube. Thanks for watching.
Back. Okay. Let's play. This video was pretty good.
Why don't we blow the system up? I mean, obviously we can't just turn off the spigot on the system we have and then say, hey, everyone in the world should get this new vaccine we haven't given to anyone yet. But there must be some way that we grow vaccines mostly in eggs, the way we did in 1947.
In order to make the transition from getting out of the tried and true egg growing, which we know gives us results that can be beneficial. I mean, we've done well with that, to something that has to be much better. You have to prove that this works, and then you've got to go through all of the clinical trials, phase 1s, phase 2s, phase 3, and then show that this particular product is going to be good over a period of years. That alone, if it works perfectly, is going to take a decade.
There might be a need or even an urgent call for an entity of excitement out there that's completely disruptive, that's not beholden to bureaucratic strings and processes.
So we really do have a problem of how the world perceives influenza, and it's going to be very difficult to change that unless you do it from within and say, I don't care what your perception is, we're going to address the problem in a disruptive way and in an iterative way, because you do need both.
But it is not too crazy to think that an outbreak of a novel avian virus could occur in China somewhere. We could get the RNA sequence from that, beam it to a number of regional centers, if not local, if not even in your home at some point, and print those vaccines on a patch and self-administer.
All right. Welcome back, MGTOW Chats. How am I sounding, by the way? I sound good?
You.
Yeah, you sound perfect. Do you
iPhone for the win?
Oh, you're doing this from your phone? You sound really good.
Yeah, I over the years I have professional mic setups. The iPhone still comes in best. It's weird, but it's true.
Well, I'll start by saying today's date's the February 22nd, 2026. It is howling outside. Mayor Mamdani Chicken Mamdani is alerted that I'm apparently not allowed to drive my car until 12 a.m. tonight. It's the first time I've ever seen something like that pop up on my phone where I'm not allowed to go outside in the snowstorm, but it is pretty bad. Not as bad, well, it's still too early to tell, but we had a good stretch of 4 or 5 days where it was in the single digits in New York City. I haven't experienced cold like that in quite a while. It was nice. It's very refreshing. When it drops below 20 degrees, I want to say there's something, the atmosphere, the feeling, it's for me, it's refreshing. I know a lot of people hate it, but I do like the cold weather. A lot of people were kind of freaking out about how cold it was, but I can't recall it being this cold maybe like 5-6 years. You live in Maine, so you experience it. Single digits are the norm in Maine, are they not?
They can be in January and February, at least up here in northern Maine. It's that way. It's, I'll say objectively speaking, really, weather isn't that bad until you get under zero. And just because once you get below zero, you start being able to tell, and I'm not even pretending by saying this, how cold it is by how much the air burns when it enters your lungs.
Right.
Like by the time you hit about 20, it's genuinely unpleasant. And so there's, I guess
you mean negative 20?
Yeah, exactly. Correct. Sorry about that. Yeah, negative 20. When you get to that level of 20 below, you can feel it burning. But, in reality, that sort of 10 to 30 degree spot is good. And then I'd even make the argument, I think, between 10 to 20 is better. Otherwise, you end up with that famous kind of mid-Atlantic slop of, like, the wintry mix. It's, like, gray, sort of like, I don't know, industrial waste at the side of the road, as opposed to your picturesque New England winters.
I was listening to a New Yorker, a homeless New Yorker, who I think he's in Florida now. He's a recovering heroin addict. He's got a popular YouTube channel. He's got a ponytail. And it's funny, just, listening to him for about an hour, 2 hours, he didn't say where he was from, but I was like, this guy sounds like he's from like where I grew up, and just the way his words were put together, and the way he was like his critical thinking skills. And I'm like, I think he's from New York. And then he did an upload like a couple of weeks later about the differences in cold, being homeless in the cold. And he made a point that New York's cold is not like Canada's cold. And he was basically insinuating what you had just said, that New York's cold is a wet, nasty, it's an unpleasant cold. And he said if you're homeless in Canada, it's much more tolerable. Like if it's 20 degrees in New York versus 20 degrees in Canada, he's saying the air is drier. There's not this soppiness to it.
It's not just that too, but like you can find ways to work with snow to make things warmer. You know, let's just say you have a regular frame house, okay? You can stack snow along the side of it and it serves as an inherent insulator. So in a lot of ways, it really is manageable. And the other thing is you're set up where you don't deal with the real problem, which is the constant phase transition. You know, snow becomes ice, becomes melt, and all of that. So it is easier, I think, in a lot of ways. I mean, but you also have to be better prepared.
100%. I during that cold streak, the wind was hitting my windows, hitting my AC units, and I think it got down to between 50 and 55. And when I lived in North Carolina, trying to keep up with you in some regards, like I turned off the heat all winter long. I wanted to see like what my tolerance was, and it was around the 50 to 55 degree mark, and it was bad in here. It was, and just the wind was just keep constantly hitting my windows, seeping through every little crevice. I still have a bunch of blankets wrapped around my my wall sleeve. 50 to 55. It was bad. It was not pleasant. And it's your body's fine, but your extremities really suffer the most, and you can't enjoy anything. So I'm trying to read a book. I'm trying to, as I just mentioned, I'm taking up sewing. 100%. I'm trying to, do some like just shit around the house, and I just found myself constantly moving to keep warm. It sucked. Yeah.
No, it does suck, and I mean, you can amplify that a little bit with gear. If you have gloves, and usually up here, I think most people kind of pick one space to stay in for winter to keep warm, and then other spaces will be warmer or colder. But like we probably keep our bedroom, I'd say it's probably around 50 to be honest, but the temperature, but there's reasons for that. My wife's health being what it is, she can't handle heat for specific reasons. Although I'm often cold, but I double stack wool blankets. But I mean, we have a wood stove that basically lets us add about 50 degrees in temperature to our house. So the problem for us is if the temperature goes down to -10, then it's very difficult to kind of manage that. And it's not usually a problem, but there are some times where I have to keep that thing burning 800, 900 degrees. And there's like a whole art of like how you manage your wood stove, right? It's actually really fascinating, and how you manage these sort of temperature zones, because you're right. The loss of feeling in the extremities is a real and difficult phenomenon. And you're sort of forced to at least a degree of seasonal living and a very high tolerance for understanding. There's just times you're not going to do things as a consequence of being in the environment. That being said, that it is a mutual understanding and a mutual experience has some cultural benefits, which I think is one of the things, that you were covering very intelligently in your newest article.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Before we get into it, newsflash, there's civil unrest in Mexico. I don't know if you're paying attention to the news, Tom.
Puerto Vallarta, no, I've been watching it. Apparently, the Mexicans claim they did it on their own, but they took out a guy named El Mencho, which, it sounds like we're living the Salamanca timeline now, but that's fine. And apparently, they were mad enough, the cartels, that they are going after some of the tourists. I was watching a number of videos of Canadians freaking out, actually, because Air Canada is now not flying into and out of Canada, because if I saw it right, they were claiming a bunch of narco affiliated actors were storming the airport in Guadalajara.
That's correct.
Which is kind of interesting, right? I mean, because I'm a total information freak, you know that. You kind of wonder who's on what side here, how much of this is organic and how much of it isn't. Because for a very long time, the cartels and governments seem to have had a very good understanding of one another, and now the cartels have been sort of left out to dry by the Shine Bomb, which I think is pretty interesting and pretty fascinating to consider, especially in light of the larger geostrategic implications of the Iranian moment. I mean, but if we go down that road, that'll be the whole show, which would be interesting, but I didn't want to talk past the lovely segue I set up for you.
Well, circling back to what you had mentioned, I had written an article. It's funny. You're an author. You've written how many books are you up to right now?
19.
And it's strange. It's either you get this flow of information, these thoughts all at once, and when you have these currents running through your mind, you have to write them down. And that article, one of my longest, almost 3,000 words, took me, I don't know, just a couple of weeks to really put that all together. What I do is I usually how do I put this? If something comes to my mind, I'll blurt it out. I'll just, not proofread it, just write it down on Microsoft Word and just keep throwing shit on a draft. And then after maybe a month or two, I'll piece it all together and make an article. That's just generally how I've been doing it. That article was relatively easy versus other articles that are half as long as that one have taken me months, if not maybe some that I have sitting in a draft have taken years to write. That one was easy, and it was a topic.
Why don't you share a little bit about it, because people won't know what we're talking about.
I wrote an article about natalism. It seems to be a very popular topic, talking point the last couple of years, I would say. And being MGTOW, these are obviously most, if not all, my listeners are single guys, right? I mean, there's probably a few that are married. You're married, obviously. But there seems to be a kind of this pearl clutching over the lack of white women, white people in general, air quote white, I'm painting a broad brush here, people of Western civilization not procreating. And they talk about it, but they don't actually address the underlying fundamentals on why this is happening. Because once you start talking about those fundamentals, you start poking really more or less at economics and women's liberation. So when I wrote that, I wanted to point out the second half of the article when natalism goes wrong, and when you start having the government interfere when it comes to reproduction of your society. So I pointed out Singapore and I pointed out Romania as 2 case points. There's a few others that I didn't really necessarily want to get into because it's a little bit more boring. You could look at Russia, you could look at Korea, you look at Japan, you look at Southern and Western Europe as indicators on what direction you're going in. E. Michael Jones made a point. You have 20 years. You have 20 years to address the situation with reproduction and your population not having children. If you don't address it in a 20-year time span, you're fucked. It's over. And we've long passed that. We long shot that 20-year mark, probably about maybe 15, again, probably about 15, 20 years ago. Probably around the millennials when you really were supposed to start addressing these problems. COVID obviously acted as an accelerant. There's a lot of people talking about a baby bump during COVID. And it's still a little early to tell if there was actually a baby bump. It was minuscule, if I recall. But again, how do you address these problems? And as a MGTOW man, I am MGTOW, okay, make no mistake about it. Men are kind of just on the sideline saying, hey, look, there's your problem. This is what you need to do. Are you going to do anything about it? The answer is no. So that's my opening to talk about this article.
I'm interested that you said Korea was not a case you looked at, because I find it an utterly fascinating one about how it's basically a gender war happening on the low down there. and it's gotten pretty bad because the framing you put that I think I would clarify it in my own thinking to call it westernized women.
Yes.
Which I think fits the Singapore example.
Well, let me hold you there. As my father likes to say, anywhere there's Disney World, it's considered the West.
Well, realistically, and the orbit is a real thing because it's based on an economic model that is designed to be maximum extraction, where individual units are seen as economic actors, right? Versus the idea that a familial unit is a cultural unit worth defending. And so I think when I engaged your article, I found it interesting for the governmental analysis and the economical analysis. And I think where we can take this profitably tonight is to think about the cultural implications. You talked about Romania, for instance, where culturally they enforced women having a lot of children and they created a lot of orphanages, which in the age of Epstein, you kind of wonder what happened to those poor kids. Let's hope Erica Kirk didn't get too close to them. But when you look at the question of what is going to be a successful policy to get men and women to relate to one another in the MGTOW argument more broadly, you have to really get to the place where if you equalize economics between men and women as a social goal where they're just individual economic units, and that you create a sort of cultural argument that absolute radical equity and equality are your outcomes, of course you're going to have men and women not be together very well because women are never going to be content with that because their whole social biological development is they're going to go where the social pressures lead them as a survival mechanism, as needing protection as an inherent biological part of their nature. And they're therefore going to gravitate to surrogates instead of the men they really should be gravitating to. And I think as men have learned to go their own way, I think that is actually probably the first step in a healthy resolution to this. I don't want to call it a free market solution, but I want to say a culturally logical one, which is that maybe you need a generation of cat ladies to convince, younger women to go a different way. And I think I see in Zoomer women, and look, I'm an Xer, so, what do I know? But I think I see in Zoomer women a sort of useful nihilism that is way more accessible than the sort of woke matriarchal programming we've seen, because frankly, the government's bullshit is so incoherent, no one believes them. And maybe the answer to what a successful natalist policy is not government social programming, but incoherent government programming that breaks down so much that nature is required to make up for, let's say, inefficiencies in an inflationary economy.
Oh, I 100% agree with you. You can see it amongst women that are under the age of 25. They are sticking with one guy. They're not out whoring themselves as the millennial women have done. And when I say that, I'm talking about women that have, double-digit body counts by the time they're in their 30s, which is extremely unhealthy. Well, there's no doubt about it in my mind that is damaging. And a lot of that has to do with, it's not that she's gone about and having sex with so many men. It's that the fact that she's cohabitated, she's experienced so many different guys that she's kind of, her baseline personality has shifted away where she's not able to formulate a healthy bond with whoever she's currently fucking.
Unmarketable and self-righteous. 2 words.
Right. So you see now a lot of these, a 20-year-old woman seeing a 40-year-old woman without children, she sees the way her life has turned out, and she's asking, well, is that the life that I want? And now you're starting to see these women that are past the age of 35 up into their early 40s that they've now the chickens come home to roost, that they're unable to actually have children. They freeze their eggs or whatever it might be. But I'm assuming a lot of young women are trying to get away from the idea of careerism and, of being overly educated and a lot of these woke ideologies. The shift is certainly happening. I have a young brother. He's 16. and I interact with a lot of his friends, and I do notice they're looking for a standard. They're looking for some type of moral upright code of ethic. But the problem is that the religious institution that acted as a bulwark to selfish capitalism, to any type of nefarious agenda, it doesn't exist. There are small churches, no doubt, you know all about it, but the large institutions seem to, especially in Christianity, I'm speaking about Christianity, they're nowhere to be found. I joke, I say, why didn't with the Catholic Church with its billions of dollars never rolled out some type of app? Where is the Catholic Church when it comes to marriage as an institution? I hate to say, I feel that the Catholic Church is past its prime and probably just operates more as a real estate trust.
Catholicism is actually growing, interestingly enough, as is Orthodoxy, for some of the same reasons. Because one, no one likes Zionist Christianity, which the evangelicals have fallen to on the right side, and the sort of woke Christianity of the left you see in like Lutherans and certain Methodist churches. It's pretty bad. But I mean, I think that, I think the problem with this formulation is that I think the actual answer to this is a lot simpler than ideology. My experience over the course of my life is that women generally look for who can care for me best. And it's a way simpler question that leads to a lot of incoherence because how should I put it? I've never known a woman who was unwilling to change her opinion to suit what was in her own self-interest. And I don't say that as an insult. I say that as a recognition of just the reality of what they're going to look for. I remember back during the bad COVID days how a lot of women who would otherwise hate a man like me had very, very reactionary views, if I'm going to be honest about it. Think, oh, well, this guy's smart. He's going to save me. He can't be so bad. Until the social programming and the passage of time convinced them the actual threat of being socially ostracized over George Floyd was different. So I went from being a hero to a bastard again. But which I'm fine with, because at that point we understood the story was changing, and that if we didn't before then, and if you did, good for you. If not, that's fine. Sometimes these things take time. But what's interesting in the woman's perspective of this whole thing is it's like, all right, who is going to protect me in this situation? And when you look over the story of history and the fact that, most procreation, or at least a big chunk of it, comes from rape and from the fact that you get grabbed or you get chosen, and these were societally different values because women and men were seen as having different functions, different purposes. You have hardwired habits that are far deeper than our political understandings of this day, where women are going to look for who will protect them. So, to the Zoomer female problem. The Zoomer female problem is a Zoomer male problem because the system is rigged against men being able to be in that position. But ironically, the more the system breaks down, the better men and women will get along with one another because women will recalibrate, and they'll recalibrate probably faster than the men do.
Well put, 100%. With the way the economy is just papering over the damage, and you see, and I joke on this show about the kind of the little Tykes Fisher Price jobs that you see most women are working in: marketing, advertising, sales, things that don't actually create any value. Once the economy kicks out, you'll see a large shift in women's attitudes about men. But I hate to say, I do not see it coming anytime soon. I know a lot of people,
AI is going to destroy the very sort of white-collar, administrative, task-based jobs that companies literally can't afford to keep anymore. All those women being displaced is going to create a very unique opportunity in a very short period of time for men who have found a way to endure. And let's be honest, if you're a white-collar working man, especially if you're a white guy, you have your job because they can't fire you because you're the one competent person left, right? And if you don't have that and you're a blue-collar guy, well, you're the guy who's going to survive the first stretch of removals from the economy as we shift towards a digitalized economy where people are going to be pushed out. All of this to say, those are going to create huge social problems we could talk about, and we might agree or disagree on how quickly they're coming. But I will tell you, at least from knowing the computer sciences field pretty well, that the loss of jobs at places like the FANGs, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, all those, NVIDIA, is already starting. And it's only accelerating. And not only that, but the fact that the other people are getting replaced by the H-1B visa thing is going to see a lot of women become way more reactionary because now their economic well-being is being threatened. So there's a situation where we're going to have a very strange milieu where men and women can maybe reset the conversation to, let's say, 2007 Occupy Wall Street. And I don't know what doors that opens for it to work differently, but I think that might be the mood here in a year, assuming we avoid World War II or, being overrun by the cartels in the next 48 hours.
I think Occupy Wall Street was 2011.
Was it?
Yeah, check. You're in front of your computer?
Well, I'd have to open up because the Wall Street crisis was in 2007. It was right there because I remember McCain came in and he blew his whole presidency against Obama, saying, I'm going to rescue Wall Street, because that came all out of Bear Stearns and AIG, the stuff that happened in New York. You'd remember all that.
But do you think that what we're experiencing right now, talking about the economy, do you think the situation with the economy all stems from 2008, or would you trace it back further? Because that always seems to be a major talking point. And then we'll go back to what you were talking about the women question.
It depends. You'd have to clarify the question in this sense. Of course, everything goes back if you want to pick whichever thread. Which thread are you trying to pull?
Right.
I mean, if you want, I'm happy to talk about Babylonian temple. We can go back as far as you like, and I can probably hold the thread better than most. But I think that there is something in the 2007 moment about the fact that what happened before that was rallying the country in support of the neoconservative vision.
Right.
And that after that, elite spending, which is to say government money that got laundered through NGOs, went into engineering cultural division, and that the immigration machine went into overdrive during Obama, which followed, because if people in the lower classes were fighting one another, things like gangs in New York, then they wouldn't be fighting the people who were on the Upper East Side.
That's a good point. But if you can point anywhere on a map, excluding Nigeria, basically, and you see demographic decline to one extent or another. Okay. I think Brazil, South America now is experiencing demographic decline. So we're seeing the ramifications of women's liberation, most of it through the UN. It's spread globally, right? So you're putting women in the workforce globally now, and you could use Korea and Japan as the canary in the coal mines on what direction you're actually going towards. The difference, though, with Japan and Korea is they have very strict immigration laws. So it's as if the West doesn't want to go through the natural economic by letting your economy tank for whatever, 10, 15, 20 years, could go even further. Who knows?
Well,
right?
You're thinking of it wrong. It's not. They give you economics because numbers are attractive to people. Here's the way they think of it. Elites take an anti-natalist position because they think the combination of automation and machines allow them to maintain sovereignty over you through a control grid that exists through narrative and other functions where you would otherwise resist if you had sufficient numbers, because you wouldn't like your relative status in it. And that for them, it's more about mitigating risk, I think, and the risk being a group of people of high agency who can cause problems to them. You can frame it in a number of different sort of areas, but it's no secret to say over history, the aristocracy or the oligarchy has tried to keep the plebs under control. And how you keep the plebs under control, you keep their numbers down. If you're not going to have wars, well, then you need to have anti-natalist policies,
Good
and if
point,
men
yeah.
and women can't work with one another, you look at
But that doesn't
families
tie
that
into
have
the
needs. They
immigration.
don't live like this. They have
I guess the immigration question comes down to they just want to dilute the white population.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, and I don't even know if it's so much about the white thing as it is about the high agency thing. I mean, they don't like that whites believe in sort of liberty as a general topic, but ultimately, their vision of the future is that we will not need nearly so many people. The
Right.
old George Guidestone thing, 500 million people. And the interesting thing is, if you look at employment likelihood with the development of AI and with automation, I mean, I am an AI maximalist based upon what I have learned in it. And I've spent a lot of time doing contract work very, very close to it. I think it's kind of like a white noise transmitter. If you know how to ask the right questions, you can get the answers. But this is going to lead to a K-shaped economy, where you're going to have the people who are cognitive elites find a way to be successful in spite of themselves, and you're going to have a whole lot of other people who are going to be left behind, and they're going to try to figure out ways to engineer those people into distractions until the people who have real agency in our society feel like they have control over what the future can hold, because the danger for them is this. Technology is obviously about to make a quantum leap in advancements. You can see a lot of things have been held back a long time because a lot of caught up financial interests were in it. COVID broke the world's financial structures. So everyone's now fighting for competitive advantage, groups, individuals, states, between states, within states. And so new ideas are going to come up, but new ideas like the Gutenberg press, or whatever, are incredibly destructive to existing hierarchies. And so the problem from the programmatic perspective is this: how do you keep your hierarchy in a time of abundance? Well, you need to create some level of artificial scarcity. In a very real way, the scarcity they seem to have settled on is we don't want a lot of people, so we're going to put men at war with women and groups of people at war with each other. I don't agree with it. It's really cynical and kind of evil, but it's more useful to understand the world by how people behave rather than just overlooking that a lot of times they'll operate on a different principle, whereas we are told kind of like we exist at these impersonal forces. If Epstein's proved nothing, it's that nepotism is running the world. So let's honor that and look at why and how it would work.
Look, I finally took the plunge into dicking around with AI, and I'm not. Look, I guess because it's still early. I'm not that impressed. It's a refined search engine thus far.
What do you think an average secretary is?
That's
my point. It doesn't have to be high agency. The world is very inatech. A lot of functions are redundant because they serve social ideas. Actual genius is rare. Bureaucracy is profligate, especially in late empire. A halfway smart computer can do the work of 10 employees. It's the same reason. Let's use the microcosm. It's the same reason that they put in, if you have grocery stores and they put in those automatic checkout machines, accepting the whole theft problem, which is itself a separate problem a little bit. People find it cheaper. You pay one-time $20,000 expense, and how much are you saving? And mind you, a lot of the reasons why AI is dumb is because programmers are following a human way of thinking of it. As people start to think differently about what can be done with the technology, I really do think it's going to develop. But in the short to medium term, the real threat is bullshit fake jobs that existed only on paper as functions that had to be met can now be automated. And the loss of the white-collar jobs of the people who were doing basic coding tasks, junior coders, and who were administrative flunkies at every step of a legal clerk. What it's really going to do is it's going to take out the entry-level grunt positions, and it's going to destroy in that a ladder of development in the way that boomers frankly always love to do.
Brutal.
Okay. So now, so let's say you start eliminating these jobs. what type of jobs fill those jobs that are considered obsolete. Take, for example, the woman who used to, the operator who used to connect phone calls. That doesn't exist anymore. There's a lot of different telecommunication jobs that were huge 25 years ago that no longer exist. Manufacturing. I did a show with Pete Cunis a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago now, where I mentioned that in 1950 something, early 1950s, New York City was mostly a manufacturing location. Now it sits up at like 2%. So what's going to happen with all these people? Is it really going to be UBI? Like, I mean, that's the only plausible.
I think it has to be.
Yeah, it does. I know.
One, it has to be. I think you put a bunch of people on the dole and you give them ways in a sort of Aldous Huxley way to be comfortable. And before you get to that point, you try to engineer something to reduce the numbers. I mean, because ultimately, you know, how does the corporate world treat superfluous labor, right? It leaves it to rot. And, you know, it seems like the movement has been that the sort of technocracy is insulating itself above and beyond governance and governments to just exist in, you know, in third world countries. I mean, what difference does it make to a major corporation if America becomes one more third world country they operate in? I mean, this is the problem of having different centers of power in society, and that the real power has always been on the financial side, you know, people who make money out of thin air. What do you do with the people? I don't think they really have a good answer for that, other than to say that the smaller the number, the easier it is to manage. And, you know, specifically about all these people who are going to lose these tech positions. I mean, I do think over the medium term, you could construct a society realistically where you basically outsource certain elements of physical labor to certain sort of extractive operations. I mean, it's no more ridiculous than crypto, and then create something like maybe the oil fund in Alaska, where you have a genuine economy of some good that has some value, where humans make something off of it just by virtue of their status. And, you know, maybe that's what it is. And you could say, does that destroy agency? And the answer is it absolutely does. But, you know, we've never been willing to question why fake little green notes should have our allegiance. So I don't know why we would expect we behave any differently now.
Do you think gold prices are how do I say? Gold prices right now, is it a direct correlation to the money printing, or is the gold prices just catching up to where its actual market should be?
I think a lot of the problems with the prices in the high level commodities is the arbitrage market between China and the U.S., the spot silver contracts, and the fight over what's going to be the reserve currency. I mean, it seems pretty obvious that BRICS countries want to go to a commodity-based economy, and they would probably love to go to a specie-based currency. And it, as usual, you know, the United States, and let's be honest, the links we have into the communities lead us to places like wars like Iran, probably want to keep the debt-based economy of extraction and control going at any sort of level. At the end of the day, you're sort of seeing the psychopathy of the leadership of the West, who has been able to live through complete narrative control through basically keeping censorship as a more effective information protocol than actually information get out there, become incoherent because they can't do this. And so that's why I think you're seeing a rush and a flight of investors to stay of value type things like gold and silver, because realistically, with crypto, we literally have in Bitcoin coming up in the Epstein files as something that sounds like a Rothschild creation, separate from even above Mossad. When you start looking at who controls what pieces on the board, and China's specific position, China wants to get out of that string problem. And they are the ones who are really causing the rise in the cost of this, because they are trying to break the American silver market, which on paper has way more ability. It's over leveraged with respect to the amount of silver that can be claimed. I think they've said we have 30 pieces of theoretical silver on paper for like every one that could actually be redeemed at any of the major mints on the contracts. So when you have those sorts of situations where you have, you know, honestly, much like 2007, this sort of margin-based liquidity leveraging fractional reserve game that finance is being played, and a player who has a strategic chance to change that in China, who doesn't necessarily like how things are going. And I don't think they want to fight a war with the United States, but I think they would prefer to be at the center of the story. Maybe that's a piece of this, and then you get to the question of where is the actual gold and silver at the sovereign level, because we're looking at this as individual investors in the microeconomy. But in the macroeconomy, the question is who is actually holding the cards at the table.
Well, who is?
Well, and that's the right question. I mean, I think that as far as sovereign state actors are, I know the Russians and the Chinese hold a lot. I know that we hold a lot of the
I know Germany does too.
Well, Germany does on paper, but in reality, supposedly the German stuff is held by the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. So if it's not in your vault, it's not in your hands. And I think the Germans, better than a lot of people, understand this. So I suspect the macro battle is between the Western banking system that's like City of London, Federal Reserve, Bank of International Settlements. And I think that's why it's interesting that you see Russia always playing this tweener role versus what you see in China, which is a hard-based, communist nationalist sort of developed economy that wants to go to commodity basis. But the problem China has is that they really only have weak allies, and that every time they try to lift up these countries to do sort of colonialism, what they find is they're investing money into a market that can't pay back. And that's why the debt-based model of the U.S. is proving surprisingly resilient, which is something that they had. It's important to remember they had 300 years to figure out how to have state leverage. If you read Joseph Farrell's books, he's pretty good on this. The way that,
he's awesome.
Exactly.
I love him.
It's the state leveraged finance, though, because the real money for bankers is in having governments be in debt to them, which means the people are then controlled at a level of remove, which is how basically the Western system works.
Right, but here's the thing. It goes back to the old saying is that, and this is obviously a standard talking point, is that both China and the United States have a gun to each other's head. Nike is in China. Adidas is in China. Apple is, I don't know about Apple, but all the major corporations depend on China. China depends on the West to keep producing their shit. I don't really care what people say that, get away from China, we can't, we're totally tied to one another, and China cannot afford a war with the United States because its whole manufacturing base is solely dependent on the United States' consumption of shit, which circles back to women's obsession with junk, which
yeah, but you're right. China needs is a market to sell its shit to. That's the simplest thing.
But hold on. You have to realize, when I lived in Cambodia, the Cambodians hated anything that came from China because they equate China to shit. Like anything China produces is garbage. So there's I'll go to a market and there's all these sick Huawei phones. Is that what that Huawei? Is that the name of the company? Huawei phones. Beautiful, really nice phones. I'm like, God damn, that's a sick phone. Untouched, because the Khmer see China's manufacturing. Anything that China's innovated is garbage. If it came from the West, it's good. How about cars? You can run down the gamut and see that the overriding majority of the world prefers products that come from a Western country. The problem with the United States is that we come up with the ideas and the baseline, like the startup, the fundamentals on paper, we create, and then we just give it to China to manufacture when we're not actually manufacturing. And you know this, during COVID, why was COVID so bad in Italy? Because just because it says made in Italy doesn't mean it was an Italian that produced it. The Italians brought in cheap labor from China, stuck them in the factories, and they all had COVID when they came back from the Lunar New Year during that 1 month siesta.
Yeah, it was the textile factories in Milan. I remember that.
Yep. And here's something also, and I don't know if you remember you saying this, but
I say a lot.
I know you don't, but I always take away the good points. I remember when you were ranting when you're like, I don't know, your chicken died. What was the name of the chicken that Barb? Barb was sick.
We've lost a lot of chickens. We did have a Barb. She was a Rhode Island Red. She was a good bird.
Barb was our favorite. We all loved Barb. I remember Barb very well. You guys took care of Barb. And you mentioned that your assumption about COVID, which is very plausible, and I was like, God damn, that sounds fascinating, super red pilled. You were like, okay, COVID is knocking out all the idiots. Like the COVID vaccine was going to knock out the people that couldn't critically think, and the people that were left were going to be the slave class, because they were the critical thinkers to bring about this new age, this utopia, this zeitgeist. Because we need critical thinkers, we need people that can think, 3 steps ahead. What better than rolling out a vaccine that's untested, unproven, so not even a vaccine, and wipe out the people that took the vaccine because they're the useful idiots, and keep all the ones that didn't take the vaccine and use them as the future labor force of this new world. Do you remember you saying that?
I do remember saying that.
Yeah, that was great.
Is plausible. And, one of the things that maybe this will give people some hope, I think the human immune system is incredibly adaptive, and I think it did a far better job than probably people would have thought under those circumstances if there was for the people who were really exposed. But, the problem with COVID and the problem with all these things is we don't really have good information to draw conclusions about what's happening. So all we can kind of look at is what we see. And your comments about the interdependency of China and the United States economically are absolutely true. I do think the quality of Chinese goods is probably regarded more highly in the United States than many places. I think compared to the more likely alternative of an economy of our scale, which is made in India products, I have had the experience of both of these, and I would rather deal with Chinese products 100 times out of 100 versus Indian products, because India is its unique sort of special. Let's leave it that way.
Chinese, look, we can bash China all we want, but the Chinese actually care to a point about what they put out. My friend started an Amazon business making wallets and coin purses or something, like these little devices that you can keep coins and all your credit cards and stuff. They're very ingenuitive, and he started getting through Alibaba, a manufacturing company in China, to make it for him. And he actually went there to meet the people that were manufacturing, and they were so excited to actually meet the person who's employing them, and they were so happy to show them around their factory, and they took a lot of pride in what they were doing and stuff. So I guess that's kind of the far Asian work ethic, because they do work, like they do whole ass.
Let's be
They're
very
just
clear.
stupid sometimes.
Chinese are pretty efficient as things go.
Yeah.
Have a decent understanding of quality control. They're not particularly innovative, but they are, they've always been able to do certain things well. And the problem is, we sent all our economics over there. Our corporations decided to extract shareholder value, i.e. the sort of Mitt Romney sort of venture capitalism model.
Gain and gain.
Yeah, exactly. Precisely so. And so now we have a situation where there is a symbiotic relationship. But, the symbiotic relationship between the American market and the Chinese market, which I think you rightly identify, does not preclude massive changes to governance in either country that the governments may enact over each other. And this is one of the more interesting things. The extent to which the world economy, even national economies, are resilient from governments, because what role do governments play in our societies beyond actually being sort of a restraint on social reforms that are needed, a source of inefficiency, and also, in many cases, the exact reason that stops a lot of sort of innovations. So realistically, China might just say, okay, destabilize the U.S., as long as there's sort of like certain currency games that happen. And, when you look at banks, for instance, let's talk about the U.S. dollar for a second in terms of crypto, because this might be relevant here. The U.S. dollar and Bitcoin are inextricably linked through Tether, where the plan was for, instead of having the petrodollar, we'd have the crypto dollar. And having the crypto dollar be the remittances between all the immigration as the arbitrage that was set up, which is why those never get taxed, by the way, because you're literally seeing billions of dollars of white money as well as black money move between borders, is a way to ensure the dollar remains in circulation. Because the people who think in terms of currencies don't think in terms of assets. They think in terms of velocities. They think of how you move money supply around. And what they really want to do is make sure that you are stuck in their system. Because if you really look at this at the highest level, I keep thinking about why I've gotten detained at borders. And it turns out what governments really fear in dissidents is this. They fear people who can question narrative control by giving other plausible arguments for why things are happening. Because sometimes you figure out the game that way. And that's the sort of logic I think that is kind of at the root of these battles, where we look at these things kind of like government and economic models, but really they're sort of like clannish type actors that are happening there. And that people are kind of just the pieces on the board beneath all these sort of statistical layers that are built as narrative justifications for the real question that we care about, which is who's going to be in control. Because the people who are going to be in control are going to be the people who set up the policies that make us have to deal with their ridiculous social models where they see us suffer because, like you said rightly in your argument, all the incentives are misaligned with one another.
Okay, so with that being said, look, circling back to the whole women question, right? Why do you think the government doesn't even touch the topic of birth rate in decline and other non-tangible problems in the United States? Is it just because it's the whole libertarian argument, you're free to do what you want, so why not do it on the road?
The answer is because the government doesn't want women questioning that government will take care of them.
That's a good point. I mean, how many government jobs are occupied by women and minorities, for that matter?
He's mean to me. I go to the court.
Right.
I get a restraining
This daddy is the nanny state. The dad actually called
Daddy,
instead of calling the nanny state, the
has
daddy
to give
state.
love to his daughter. That's daddy's job. It's not Big Brother. It's Big Daddy. So
Well,
it's really that. It's propaganda. I mean, and this is why I say it's narrative control. It's a bullshit story. And you could say to me that the story is utterly disconnected from reality. And I would say to you in response, that's why it works, because it's a good story. They don't care about the reality. They care about the feelings in the moment. Are you listening to me? Okay. I mean, that's the way it is. And the government figured out, if you want, we could go back and, you want to pick the spot. We'd have to go back to, what's his name? Freud's nephew, the one who was out there, saying that, okay, we're going to propagandize women and we're going to do this in an exact way. And we're going to give them the right to vote. And we're going to tell them what they have to believe. And it's worked pretty well. So the government stuck to that in 100 years in the West. And we could call that communism, and it certainly is communism in a certain way. But really, it's more about engineering the biology in a way that makes people, act foolishly. And Bernays, that's what it is, Edward Bernays. If you look at this was a thought of social programming going back 100 years, which is why all these battles, I argue fundamentally that all these other levels are valid, but you have to look at the narrative construct of the ideas. And the narrative construct here is that women are best cared for when the state cares for all of them. And it's just enacted at an individual level, which is why you see, for instance, you're like, why is it when you have commercials full of all these minorities that they always include white women? Because they need to be part of the in-group for the whole story to work.
That's a good point. When I wrote the article on natalism, I did mention about Ceausescu's Romania that the centerpiece to the decree was young women, no one else. The hyper focus on young, fertile, nubile women, and that was kind of the center point to Ceausescu's regime on how to get women on board with the communist program.
Right. And, for lack of a better word, I mean, those programs were successful because what their job was to do was to sustain their societies. And communist societies are incredibly ineffective. But if you can stay in power in spite of that, you've done a pretty good job from the narrow perspective of being the person who's in the Ceausescu position. And why does he get into so much trouble? Because the Soviet Union lost power. When your side starts losing power, the United States is losing power. Look what a train wreck we have in the UK for governance, for France, for the Allies in the American sphere. I mean, the guy who was in South Korea recently, he was a mess too. Or the one before the current lady in Japan. So
Oh, he's dead, isn't he? Or no, there was someone in between the guy who got
yeah,
killed.
there was not Abe. There was Abe, and then there was the left wing guy who was letting too many people in, and
Right.
now they've kind of gone hard right. But back to the point of China. So China's been taking some pretty aggressive steps against Israel lately, which is interesting because Russia won't do that, and China and Russia are supposed to be pretty close, and yet Russia was literally saying that they might be interested in going back on the dollar. Now they could be lying. Or you could remember Russia was a country where, the Bolsheviks ultimately are sort of the same people who are behind Israel, if we're really going to be honest about it. And so they never really got purged. We could talk about Stalin and how that didn't happen. But therefore, it kind of makes you wonder if Russia is the traitor against China. Because let's say that we do have conflict. Just for there's always one who jumps sides, right? And if we can separate out that you want to have the extractive economy of Russia or the productive economy of China or the purchasing economy of America, it doesn't matter. You can probably try to engineer breakdowns of governments in ways where you can keep the parts you want and get rid of the parts that were out of control. Like Venezuela as example. Venezuela hasn't changed at all. They just basically executed, a change in management. And yet, look at what a difference it makes economically. And I think sort of in a world where there is so much information out there, narrative, that you're going to see more scalpel surgical type actions that are going to be indicative of how the players are playing the game.
So, bring up what's happened today, just as the Mexican government lopped the head of some high cartels. You're saying like that would be an example of a scalpel, strategic move where you don't have to have these mass movements to make change in policy. You just go after the heads on who's setting the tone and who's not going along with the narrative that the West is drumbeating.
Yeah, and you can destabilize them. I mean, let's look at what's happened in Mexico as best we can assert right now, right? What looks like happened is American pressure. All right, let's go back further. Ultimately, the drug trade in Mexico starts because American intelligence services find it useful to move black money in and out, okay? Because they've got to launder a lot of money, because banks have a whole bunch of money that they need to move around to circulate to create the illusions of things working, the whole Gary Webb thing, if you read Dark Alliance the day. So they have to do all that. So all these sort of terrible operations that move money around, these things are all caught up in the blackmail, the politics, the economics, the whole Epstein world. But we ultimately play a major role in creating this because the CIA's job is to basically serve as the role of the bank watching the government, if you really want to think of it in the simplest terms. Mexico, therefore, ends up in this spot where they end up being taken under control. Their domestic agriculture is wrecked during NAFTA. So drug trading comes up because people are desperate. When people are desperate, what do they get into? They get into drugs. Look at anything with meth or heroin, all down the East Coast, different places. This sort of economy develops kind of naturally on its own in that sort of vacuum because it's a high-risk economy, but it's also high money in a situation where it's difficult. Mexico, therefore, now is in a position where the cartels become the powerful agents of the West there, much like a Saddam Hussein figure, and you have a sort of, fake government there that exists for all this time. You can argue how much control AMLO, all these people have, but I think no one would argue that Sheinbaum is no one's vision of a strong leader. This is a person who is obviously owned by someone, and the question is who? And the answer seems to be, based on what's happening, if the Mexican government goes to war with the cartels, there is some force pulling at her stronger than the cartels who had been her patrons, and that they were being set up as a disposable foil to be used in the narrative shift. What could the narrative shift be? Well, if I were me and I was putting on my evil hat, I would say not only are we fighting these people at home, but these are the human traffickers who were mentioned in the Epstein files, and you put the anger onto people like them because the public is pissed off and you need somewhere to shift the stink. Giving them the person to blame for it, well, that trick's worked pretty good a lot of times. And when you destabilize Mexico, that whole North American Union thing that's been in the background, that now as we're onshoring things because China, we don't want to be dependent on them, now you have an excuse to intervene in Mexico that you've engineered for yourself. And the more people feel unsettled by that, when people are unsettled, they want a strong government. They're not feeling good about a war in Iran. They're not feeling good about our Middle Eastern policy. But if they're scared, they want militarism. And this goes back to, what we talked about at the beginning with women. If women feel like they're unsafe, let's say 5 school buses blow up tomorrow, all of a sudden, they just want someone attacked. They want the illusion of safety instead of the reality of the actual interests that are engineering the whole damn thing. So the question here that's interesting is how much the U.S. destabilizes Mexico, because you create a crisis because you want to control the outcome. And I figure that's got to be a big part of this, because we are definitely the ones pushing the gas on this. The timing of it is very, very curious to me. And I'm curious to see if these sort of drug motors move more, because it may very well be, and I don't know if this is right, but I would have been stronger in saying this maybe 5 years ago, that maybe the thing that was realized after the Gaza situation is that the idea that you're going to make the ascendant coalition of minorities doesn't work, because they don't have the empathy to identify that they are not the primary victims in the narrative. So instead, you try to spin up the whole Charlie Kirk Zionist Christian thing to the highest level, because you think the Mike Huckabee story that's out there that people are getting nuts about might be one that you can sell better to a population who, under very specific circumstances, have shown they will endorse and run with it. So in a lot of ways, it could be a sort of narrative desperation move that's happening out there. Now, I know this is kind of a weird way of thinking of these things, but this is the way I kind of look at it, which is, where is the intersection between narrative and control structures? Because I think it's more honest than sort of the surface level of the outcomes of the intentions that the people actually play with.
It's interesting because Trump has made it a point to start labeling drug cartels as terrorists, narco-terrorism. So he's, obviously with Venezuela. Though I do not think Venezuela is really on the forefront of supplying drugs to the United States. It's Colombia, which is into itself a conversation.
They supplied oil to Cuba and they supplied oil to China. That's what it was.
Right. So, but then you have to question, they supply oil to those countries that are kind of like on the opposite end of the spectrum as far as, who is opposed to Pax Americana, but they were okay with it.
They're still okay with it? They don't have a problem with selling gas to them. They have a problem with who's getting paid for it. And that's,
right. That's a good point.
They don't have an ideological problem. I mean, that's the other problem. People are caught up in ideology. Ideology is a justification being used for a power play. That's all it is. And
funny you say that. So when I was writing the article, the portion about Romania, I have 2 coworkers from Romania, and they're both in their late 60s. One's like 75. And they grew up as teenagers and in their early 20s under Ceausescu's Romania. So I was asking them, hey, can you take a look at this and tell me if I'm right or am I wrong? And I was like, what's your theory or ideas on the difference between fascism, communism, socialism? And they both laughed at me. They're like, it's all the same shit. They both started belly laughing.
Well, and that's the whole thing. Like, in America, we have had the unique experience of being insulated from the consequences of our own empire. Now that we don't have that anymore, I think people are beginning to take a much more realistic view on things, because your dollar isn't buying enough. I mean, energy prices are up like crazy, yeah. The economics are terrible. The average cost and growth of inflation in core goods, you start throwing those things back in there, has massively outpaced wage inflation since 1970, more or less. And on top of that, we have the social programming that is setting us at war with one another. And, the one who robs those of us who are productive and gives them the money is the one who is being thanked by the ones who are being given a pittance. And I mean, there's a reason why people who are at these levels use really horrible ways to describe most people, because most people aren't seeing the actual game as it's being played. And it's unfortunate, but I think people are beginning to realize reality, if nothing else, because social media moves faster than the propaganda can debunk it, and the pattern management is not as sharp as it once was. It's not.
Do you think that the Israeli lobby is losing its footing, and that's why you see much more of like this hemming and hawing about Israel, especially stemming from the Trump administration? Because if we look at it, Trump has done everything Netanyahu's wanted, and they seem to still not play ball with him. And he seems to really have this affinity, at least his administration, regarding Israel. And you can see both sides of the spectrum, political spectrum. The populace is not happy about it. So I'm wondering if this is kind of like the claw lashing out as it's finally coming to an end once the boomers start really entering their twilight.
Well, if you believe the Israelis for what they say, they seem to be determined to use their American connections as a spent asset, thinking that they need to maximize the extraction of the United States military right now, while the boomers still have political say, because they know they're cooked with everyone under 40. And them managing that, and the uncertainty inherently with how long they hold out versus how much trouble they get us into, I think it's fundamentally from a position of weakness as Israel has it. But Israel is surrounded by weak and compromised states. And if America bludgeons them the right way, I mean, they're trying to carve out the Middle East, and I don't think they want to carve out Egypt, and I don't think they want to carve out Saudi Arabia. You study the history of that area, the Levant, they probably really actually want to control kind of Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and probably Jordan, and maybe the oil fields of Iraq. I don't think they want to really get drawn into the mess of Baghdad, and I'm sure they don't really want to get into the Shiite triangle in the south. So if you look at that, I mean, it's interesting to look at their recent thing. Netanyahu was out talking about something he was calling the hexagon, which is they've made a series of alliances where they're allied with India, the Greeks, and a couple states in probably UAE and maybe another Arab state, maybe Egypt, which would make a lot of sense, because they were being a little tricky about that. But they see Turkey as their major threat in region, right? Because they're going to fight over Syria. We understand that. And so...
Well, the Turks don't like the Arabs.
No.
They're not and the Turks view themselves as superior to everyone else in the region. And rightfully so. I do think the Turks have their shit together compared to, I mean, not economically or politically, but they're not as lazy, let's just say.
Well, they have a sense of who they are. They is expansionist. I mean, but then again, that's why Israel is involved with Cyprus. Israel is involved with Greece. And it's interesting because we have all these countries that are like in NATO and different things. The real alliances happening on the ground are more regional. They're more broken up. And the Israeli bet seems to be that America is not going to be there. Let's carve out as big as we can. And whatever price America pays, what difference does it make? We don't really want them anymore anyway. Now, what does that mean for the people who are behind the Zionist project, sort of bankers? Are they just leaving them to rot? What is the game behind it? That's a fair question. I mean, and I can't tell you all those answers, and we could speculate, of course, how expendable Israel really is. And maybe they're incredibly expendable because they're also a spent asset. At the end of the day, is loyalty tribal or is loyalty family? And if there's a few families who have enough wealth like is suggested by the Epstein files, that, that Mossad answers to the Rothschilds, not to Israel, which makes sense because Israeli law doesn't govern the actions of Mossad. So how do you explain that? Well, what's the one place that never gets into any wars? The friggin' Swiss. So if you start looking over history, you can connect the people.
Yeah,
and
right.
Switzerland's very nice.
Okay, so that brings up the question regarding Iran. Will the Ayatollah eventually succumb to the powers that being from the outside world, or is Iran going to hold on? I truly can't make heads or tails of this.
China needs that energy. The question is, how much will the Chinese back them? That's the question in this, probably, from a hard power thing. I do not think the U.S. should be involved with this at all. And I think, honestly, if Israel chose to fight Iran straight up, I think the rockets, Israel's a small target, realistically speaking. I think Iran can win that war. So really, the whole battle ends up being, how incoherent can you make the United States? You cannot defeat the United States. You can make the United States so unactionable that they cannot stop you from doing what you want to do elsewhere. And I think that's kind of the way the Chinese view the situation.
Well, I think there's 100% truth in it. I was having a chat with Andy Nowicki, and I've had discussions where you cannot mobilize the United States citizen for another mass war. I just can't fathomably see it ever happening unless there's a ground war with China, a ground war with us being actually invaded by an actual alien, which would be someone from far Asia or Africa, or it can't be South America is what I'm trying to say, because
you know how you get that war? I'll tell you how you get it, because I've thought about this a lot. The only way you get that war, and this is actually relevant if you're watching Russia and Ukraine, is that you take people who are poor, can't get jobs, instead of telling them they're ICE workers, now they can put their video game skills to talent to be autonomous drone operators on the Eastern Front. That's pretty stark, right?
That is.
But, I mean, it would take advantage of an American skill set that, let's be honest, the DoD has been behind first-person shooters for a very, very long time, because it's useful to have a population acclimated to, A, the idea of killing, and B, with a high degree of hand-eye coordination, even though they're constrained under law. So we have actually the skill set and the training to be the army of the future. We really do, and we don't even realize it. But people are squeamish about the idea of doing things. But maybe if they thought they were playing a game, you could end game your way through this whole thing if you can convince people there's a big enough threat. So maybe you dust off the old playbook, because I think this is what they wanted to do. They wanted to make Muslims writ large the enemy, but they just went too hard in Gaza and they couldn't sell it anymore. So now we have a force looking for a narrative, and you kind of wonder, and go back to what's happening in this moment, if the Mexico story maybe plays into that. Because right now, I don't think you can go big in the Middle East unless you are just trying to, which I think this is what Israel wants to do, and the U.S. for that matter as well, is they want to engineer regime change in Iran. But I don't think the Iranian people have any interest in that, to be honest with you. I don't necessarily think they're happy with their regime, but I think the Persians are canny enough to understand the difference between the devil they have and the imposition of something worse.
Right, 100%. That's. If I was a layman in Iran, I realize, as much as I dislike the Ayatollah, I can see that what's going on with the Ayatollah's narrative on who the enemy is. I somewhat agree. I would agree with him. That if that makes sense.
And these countries don't have the luxury of thinking of the motive of independent agency. Most people don't live in superpower. Most people don't have the autonomies Americans are used to thinking of. So we can think at this level. It's very weird. You've spent time abroad. I have as well, a little bit. And people do not necessarily think at this level because it does not have relevance for their daily life. They just are not educated, trained, or accustomed to thinking of this level of agency. It's not because they're stupid. It's just not the frame.
Yeah, it's not important to them.
Right.
And I think that's kind of goes back to women. If you go around the world, women don't have this affinity for status as much as American women do. And I'm kind of been fleshing this out in my mind, that it's not even about money with women, it's status. And if you meet a European woman, an African woman, South American women are also status driven, but there as the millennials and any generation underneath the millennials are downwardly mobile, like we're going downwards, you're going to see more of this clawing for status, more for, I need to have the $1 million house, I need to have the BMW. If my husband's not a doctor, I might as well sit home with my dildos and my chili box full of cat food.
Here is the corollary to your theory, which I believe is largely correct. But status gives way to survival if women feel unsafe, because ultimately status is a reflection of survivability in the tribe. Women will sense when those things shift, and this is where the future gets really interesting, because the previous status was really economic. But once we reach the point where economic security is guaranteed, lower population UBI future, probably 5 to 10 years down the road, if they do what they say they're going to do, and they often do, then how does that change the dynamics of how men and women relate to one another? One would think, based on history, that women would probably, at that point, if things stabilize again, listen to the state, not cause a lot of waves, and be agreeable to that which guarantees their sustained income, if it can give it, like you said, status as a surrogate means of understanding, because they will think in terms of that hierarchy. So in the short term, where this whole thing is going is very destabilizing to the sort of control network. But I think writ large, the people who are planning out society directly or indirectly are very happy with the way women have been set up to put the social collective above developing their own.
Right, we saw that during COVID and with woke.
It's the story of the last, since 1970 at least. And we could go back further, but at least since the 70s. And that's been something the government's actively been doing. And why did they do that? Well, because when the dollar went off the gold standard, inflation went through the roof, costs went like crazy, and families were destroyed to have economic units. And why do they like that? Well, now the kids were being taught, the latchkey generations were all taught in school, everything, the state wanted them to know, and the parents were no longer the central authority in their lives. They were too busy working. They were showing that they were doing the right thing and being the market. Meanwhile, kids were being raised by TV and whatever they could find outside. And eventually the internet filled that gap as well. But this is kind of like the communication engineering of like the questions they really ask about, which is, how do you get to the kids? How do you get to the kids sooner? And how do you make the kids think what you want them to think? And a lot of what we see is really a function, I think, of that sort of emergent psychology of what institutions shaped your early life. And for women, in the absence of father figures, which was engineered at every single level, of course they're going to look for a surrogate, and they look for the state as the surrogate. And if the state does its job, then they'll look for the status under whatever the state says it is.
So then let me ask you, there's an article, and I'll send it to you after we wrap this up. There's an article about political violence, and that it's women that are kind of at the forefront of being okay, and a nod and a wink that political violence is justified in it's women that we see at these protests. It's women that we see protesting against ICE. And I've listened to a couple of podcasts on the left side of the political divide just to see exactly what they're saying and what they're thinking and stuff. Just as a refresher, kind of a smelling salt, just to remind you. Right, and listening to it, it's mostly middle-aged, childless women. They completely gloss over or don't even mention the fact why ICE is there in the first place. Okay, and they keep bringing up fascism and the mustache man and completely wrong terminology on what fascism really truly is, but that's a topic for another day.
So you're frustrated that they are endorsing implicit violence when it should be theoretically the opposite of what they want. But they
they don't actually know what true violence is. And you've made a point. But you've made a point on your show, like, has an American city ever been razed? I remember you saying that. You said it's so like sinister. Has it ever happened? Has Detroit ever been bombed? Even though it already looks like a nuke went off in it. You know, so like again, it's as if the
it's the insulation from the consequence of the violence, right?
Right.
It's like their objection isn't to the violence. The objection is, I don't want to suffer the consequence of it. And that's totally different. You know, people, the same person would say, oh, I'd never heard an animal will eat a steak as long as they never have to kill a cow.
Right.
I mean, that sort of hypocrisy is the, what they used to call it, first world problems, right? These are, and we are accustomed to this, unfortunately. And because of that, because people are ignorant of process, they will walk into things blindly, and that is the danger. I mean, that's honestly, there are people who say it's a simple way of looking at it, but not untrue, that, you know, certain radical movements can sometimes lead to certain really unpredicted areas because systems that are quite powerful are often delicate, and you could have a breakdown because there's just a breakdown in order, and then only violence works because there's no authority. And there's real non-zero risks of that happening. I mean, especially, you know, to bring it to something relevant now, you know, because this could happen. What if there's blowbacks from what's happening in Mexico right now? Let's war game out a little bit how that's going to be responded to, you know, because if there's real consequences of violence, on one hand, there'll be the impulse to say, you know, maybe for men, let's fight back. But women will probably say, why did you put us in this position? Even though you could argue that it was their policies that did it all along, but that's not going to matter because what's going to matter in the moment is I do not feel safe.
Right. Fix it.
If you want to understand the way this works, I have a very simple method I can teach all of you. Get a bunch of hens and just watch them. You'll figure it out. It's not that different from the way it works for people. It's just not. I wish it was.
Do you think, this is the next article I'm working on, do you think the internet is desensitizing the population, or do you, Pete Kunis says it's the opposite, it's making us more feminine? He's saying, yeah, you're being desensitized, but you're freaking out over nonsense, and you're kind of like, as soon as there's a drop of blood, you panic, and you're asking for the state to do something about it. Or are we being desensitized to the point where we're making memes and gifs and like laughing about those two people that got killed in Minnesota? Pretty good.
It is obviously desensitizing. I don't think anyone would dispute that. Anytime you've seen too much, you kind of can't help having the same response to it. I wouldn't say it's feminine. I would say that my own read is it makes us very reactive. We are not very good anymore at organizing and putting pieces together. We are given a series of events that we have to respond to in real time.
Yep.
And that what happens is it kind of blows out your brain hormones, where you're kind of like that old dude who's putting your social security check at slot machine. But instead of that, you're trying to doom scroll and see where the threats are in a world that feels like, you know, it's some like weird wheel of tortures coming at you. So mentally, I think what happens is people end up fried, and because we have too many threats, we can't see deeper or subtle threats, and that we kind of get stuck fighting a war of all against all while the devs are sitting in the back room really doing the programming.
Well, yeah, we can't process this amount of information. And COVID's a great example. I remember you reading about what was it? What was the stuff in the vaccines that you were freaking out about? Jesus, name just slipped my mind. Oh God, the Japan graphene. That was it. Like, what's graphene? And then, right. I don't want to get on the top of graphene, but the point is, you and thousands, if not tens of thousands of others were trying to suss out all this information about placebos and what the definition of vaccine is, what's mRNA, the history of Pfizer and Moderna, and it just
terrible. Yeah.
And you know, I remember my mother just glued to the television watching CNN, and she goes, people cannot process this amount of statistics and this amount of information all at one time. And I think that's where we are today as far as the current events and media. It's like, here today, this is the current freak out. Okay, moving on to the next thing. And I'm like, wait, hold on. We still need to process what just happened last week.
The
Have we
world is
come
too
to
big and
Yeah.
too intimate. I agree with you. That on the one hand, we have way too much out there that we know a little bit about, and we are not capable of knowing enough of the connections between things, you know? And it is true. And, you know, the funny thing is I actually still believe graphene is an amazing superconductor. And I've kind of settled on my own belief being that we are way more waves and way less particles, so that when governments want to do things, they generally try to do things through sort of EM radiation type stuff. And that what happens then is that the other thing governments do is there's a lot of things I think that happen that nobody has control over, that are a little bit on the supernatural side, that government tries to claim they have a hand in, because they're probably just as clueless as we are. Because as they say, as Tucker said, these are not impressive people. So the world is stranger and we understand it less. And I kind of think that's the singularity that they talk about that we're actually heading toward. What happens when you have all the information and none of the context? Well, it seems to me then society becomes kind of a free-for-all and a jump ball. And that what we may see for the survivors of this sort of incoherence is a fight to find new means of narrative composition. And I think the ones that manage to have people live successfully with one another, where something can be built that is meaningful, that is outside the sort of social financial framework, are going to survive and have more success. Because whatever else happens, when you stop agreeing on what reality means, and it's kind of hard to do that if no one trusts who's telling the story, and the story's too big to be told as a whole, and everyone gets their own little piece of it, it's kind of like a virtual Tower of Babel, if that makes any sense.
No, 100% it does. Well, listen, I had a lot of fun talking to you as always, Tom. It's great catching up with you. What's your plan? Because I know you've been talking about starting the YouTube channel up again. Do you have any books on the horizon? What do we expect to see you in this new year?
So all right, so yeah, the two things. If you're curious, if you look under Apostle Thomas, which I use as my name when I'm doing other stuff, long story, I translated 30 books of the Bible from the Greek. It's called the Book of One, and I wrote a book called The Articulation of the Logos that talks about how to use language as an operative technology in alignment with the lessons Christ was actually teaching in the gospel. If you're interested in how you could actually turn the word into something you use in your life, and you find kind of my weird way of looking at things interesting, I think you would find that fascinating. I do have a nice little studio thing theoretically set up to do things. I just haven't known what to say lately because there's so much happening. And frankly, saying things just gets you in so much trouble these days. Not that I mind coming on with you. I have fun with that. But it's just, for me, how should I say it? My ideas get me in trouble. So, and I kind of understand why. So I do things a little differently. So we'll see what I do for the days ahead. But I do want to plant an idea with everything that's happening, because I know a lot of people are going to be very unhappy with where our society's going. At some point, the only power we have left is the power to say that we are not going to participate. And I do wonder one day, given all the mess with all the horrible things we read about Epstein and how much blackmail and control there is of an utterly immoral government, if we may just have to all sit down and say, we're not going to do crap until you're gone. Because it's only play we got left. And the day is going to come where enough force will be present in terms of electronic, automated AI labor, because this is what they want, for us to not have that veto option. I think that that's a conversation people need to start having. Not a threat to fight a war, but maybe the day where everyone decides, that they're just going to park on the bridge and we're just going to walk for the next 4 weeks until Washington goes home. And I think maybe something like that might be good. So some ideas I have, and that's what I'm working on. But as always, it is an honor, a pleasure to come on here. My works are up on Amazon if you want to read them there. If any of the spiritual stuff resonates with you, there's also information on that. And I have been doing a couple shows. I do have my account back on YouTube. It was canceled for 4 years. And I filed an appeal. I got it back. So I do have the ability to do shows, and I think I've done 3 this year. So take a look, see if they're interesting to you, and if you are, reach out. Otherwise, thank you for having me on.
Listen, God bless. We'll be in touch. I'll talk to you soon, all right?
All right. God bless.
Take care. I'll talk to you later, man.
That's that.
You have meddled with the prime.
Better Call Saul. Yeah, I love that show. Okay. Breaking news. Jesus. Oh no, this one. This one.
My journey?
Playing the long game.
The long game.
Now helping to write the future. Out corners. Display.
Hotelier.
Oh yeah, she's...
This incomes. Plus.
Was hackers to explore smart growth in a new era. Guest of honor, Mr. Rosan Roslani, delivered the keynote address
I will
that
figure
set the
out what to
tone
play
for
next.
discussions on investment and innovation.
Very insightful considering the current turbulence and also the challenges that we face.
Against a backdrop of global uncertainty, leaders underscored the importance of resilience and strong execution.
One of the things that's being reiterated is the importance of execution capability. We need to have local understanding and clarity so that we can really benefit from opportunities in really complex environments.
Driving conversations that shape tomorrow's growth. The CNA Summit 2026, brought to you by MediaCorp. Main partner, Singtel. Hello Possibilities.
In business news, oil prices and gas futures surging amidst fears of a disruption to supply after tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz largely came to a halt. And amid a hit as well to a refinery operated by regional oil giant Saudi Aramco. Brent trading close to $79 per barrel, while WTI at $72 per barrel. And from Dutch wholesale gas prices rising sharply. Saudi Arabia shut its biggest oil refinery after a drone strike. The Ras Tanura refinery is part of an energy complex and has a capacity of 550,000 barrels per day. The fire caused by debris from drones has been contained. The hit on the facility regarded by analysts as a significant escalation. Other facilities temporarily shut include Chevron's giant gas field off Israel. About 1/5 of the world's oil supply ordinarily passes through the Strait of Hormuz. This includes crude from Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iraq, Iran, and Kuwait. Tankers also carry refined products such as diesel, jet fuel, and petrol to major Asian markets, including China and India. One expert explained the factors that traders are taking into consideration that's driving volatility in energy prices.
I think the markets are flying blind. Market participants are doing their best to try and extract some signal from all this noise and the very, very chaotic situation that is unfolding, has been unfolding in the Middle East for the weekend. But as of now, the reason you haven't seen a much bigger jump in crude and a fair degree of volatility points to me two things. One is, as I mentioned, great deal of uncertainty, but also the market keeping a very close eye on exactly the status of shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. Officially, the strait is not closed. What has happened, however, is that a lot of tanker traffic going in or that was due to come out has come to a standstill. That is more on account of the companies that are operating the ships deciding to not take chances, basically a security precaution, and to some extent insurers essentially cancelling the cover that was initially in place and waiting to raise those rates. So there is a security aspect and an aspect of what it will cost for ships to continue going through there. That's the main factor right now in the market that is guiding volatility in oil prices.
Singapore may review its GDP and inflation forecasts if needed. Speaking in Parliament, Trade and Industry Minister Gan Kim Yong says the conflict in the Middle East over the weekend could have an impact on global energy prices, with possible impact as well on business costs.
The Straits of Hormuz, which is a key shipping route for crude oil and liquefied natural gas, LNG, has been closed. In the near term, This could result in an increase in global energy price. Depending on how protracted the conflict is, higher energy prices could lead to higher costs for businesses and consumers and weigh on the global and Singapore economies. We are monitoring the developments closely and will reassess our GDP and inflation forecasts if necessary.
MPs also asked Mr. Gan if there were clear triggers to increase support for businesses. Mr. Gan says there are several measures in place to strengthen resilience against potential external shocks to energy supply. But he adds some of these cannot be disclosed due to confidentiality and security reasons.
I just want to say that there's no single trigger. We will need to take into account holistically all the impact and make assessments as we go along. As and when it's necessary, we will roll out initiatives to respond to this scenario.
Now, those strikes in the Middle East casting a shadow over capital markets across Asia as well as the Middle East. Bankers and investors say the conflict is already disrupting fundraising plans and cross-border mergers as travel freezes and deal talks are put on hold over security concerns. Major banks, including Standard Chartered, Sumitomo Mitsui and Mitsubishi UFJ, have asked staff to postpone travel to the Middle East. Japan's Mizuho says a voluntary evacuation of employees is possible. While some Chinese investors have reportedly put talks to acquire infrastructure and energy assets on hold in the region. India's biggest IPO this year ends its first day of trade sharply down in the worst debut performance in more than 4 years. Analysts cite general secondary market weakness and earlier lukewarm listings. CleanMax Enviro Energy Solutions closed the day more than 17% down at the National Stock Exchange. That's after turning in one of the lowest subscription rates in 7 years by retail investors for a more than $340 million offering. The renewable energy firm supplies clients such as Amazon and Google in India. Several Indian renewable and energy-related companies that went public last year are trading below their offer prices. The sector has been under sustained pressure with oversupply and inadequate transmission infrastructure. I'll still head on this bulletin. The U.S. attacking Iran with the express purpose of changing the regime. We ask our guest James Dorsey, who was on the ground for the Iran Revolution that brought in the first supreme leader, if he sees a repeat of 1979. And Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney hails the expansion of relations with India as he meets Narendra Modi in New Delhi.
The first thing in the morning as Asia wakes up to a new day. Get up to speed with major events shaping lives in the region and other parts of the world.
Putting things in perspective with eye-opening reports and expert analysis as a new era of global politics breeds power struggles and shifting alliances.
We get to the heart of the matter and take stock of the issues you're invested in with on-the-ground reports and wall-to-wall coverage. Viewing it all from a regional lens because we put Asia first.
On its biggest stage, China made a statement to the world at this year's Spring Festival Gala. Chinese robots are coming.
发展的尽可能超出我们的想象。
The race is on to build AI-driven autonomous robots.
We are seeing more and more powerful humanoid robotics solutions that can resolve complex tasks.
Does China have what it takes to lead the robotics contest?
我们有能力把人形机器人的量产推动到10万台或者100万台。
Inside Thursday on CNA.
All new on Singapore Hour.
I'm Becky, and I'm Singapore's first competitive longboard surfer.
A little Singapore flag with our crescent and 5 stars. Who would have thought that a country with no waves can be right there with the big names?
My name is Shayna. I'm a third generation working in the forest floor. I am not crazy over flowers. I don't understand, but I think being in the friendly business is about purpose.
Don't miss Singapore Hour, Friday on CNA.
Tonight's top stories: new battlefronts in the Middle East as the US, Israel and Iran expand attacks across the region. Israel now placing a target on Lebanon after Hezbollah rocket fire. Meanwhile, Tehran has rejected negotiations with Washington. The Iranian Red Crescent reports more than 550 casualties following days of Israeli and US strikes on Iran. Many countries scrabbling to secure safety for citizens in the region, with governments making preparations to evacuate nationals from affected areas. And for more on developments in the Middle East, we're joined by James Dorsey, Adjunct Senior Fellow S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies at Nanyang Technological University, and he joins us live from Manila. Dr. Dorsey, thanks for joining us. If Iran felt...
Pleasure to be with you.
Iran, by attacking US assets in Gulf states, what's its calculation there?
I think what you're seeing is a multi-phased strategy. So the initial attacks were designed to essentially message the Gulf states that if they think that US military facilities on their soil is a deterrence, they may want to rethink that. In fact, US military facilities on their soil is a liability. What we're seeing today with the expansion of the attacks on critical energy facilities in Qatar, in Saudi Arabia, now with the closing down of Qatari production of liquid natural gas and associated products, the message being this is not only going to affect your lifelines, in lifelines of the Gulf states, it's going to affect the lifelines or significantly the economies of major players, including the United States. And therefore, in that way, increasing the pressure on the United States to end the hostilities and return to a negotiating table on equitable terms.
But given that we've just seen a joint statement out in the last hour or so involving the US and 6 allied Gulf states, would you say this message maybe has backfired?
The Gulf states are in a bind in the sense that they're being attacked, they need to respond, but there is no real good response. You saw the Gulf states' foreign ministers last night issue a statement in which for the first time they kept open the option of a military response. But that's problematic too, not just because of what it would mean, but also because you would have the Gulf states attacking Iran alongside Israel and the United States. And that's something, that's an image that the Gulf states certainly do not want.
From Iran's side, the US president wanting, his general preference is for short, targeted clinical strikes with very little pickup after that. But he's now warning that this could extend into weeks. In fact, that could be, some might say that's an optimistic reading. What do you think we would need to see for Iran to make the sorts of concessions Mr. Trump would want to end this strike on Iran?
I think there are two issues here. In my mind, Trump has boxed himself into a corner. Ironically, he yesterday had an opportunity to get out of this quagmire. With the killing of the Iranian supreme leader, he could have said, we're done. We've cut off this head of the snake. Now you, the Iranian people, have the opportunity to change your regime. He didn't do that. And so by not doing that, you have a situation in which victory for the Iranians constitutes survival of the regime, whether that's the recent supreme leader, whether that's under the next supreme leader, or even under a third supreme leader. As long as the regime survives, that is a victory for Iran. The stakes for a victory for Trump are far higher. The second problem that you have is that Iran and the United States, and this is a reflection of where we're going with the international world order, have a very different definition of what constitutes a negotiated solution and what constitutes progress in negotiations. For Donald Trump, the definition of a solution is surrender, capitulation. Those were, that was in fact the word that the U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff used in an interview last week. For the Iranians, it's a much more traditional definition in terms of finding solutions that are mutually beneficial, mutually acceptable, and allow all parties to save face.
Oh, very quickly, Dr. Dorsey, Mr. Trump has said, telling the Iranian people, we'll do the heavy lifting, and then why don't you step in after that to seize the day and remove your own government? You don't think that would work?
That's a deceiving and, in my mind, in fact, misleading proposition. If you go back to the 1979 revolution and you go all through popular revolts since then, Philippines 1986, Indonesia 1998, 2011 Arab popular protests, what mass protests do is set the stage for cracks within the political elite or within the military and security establishment. That's what happened in 1979. I stood in the exact street where it happened and watched it happen when the middle ranks of the Iranian Air Force revolted. And you therefore had a split in the armed forces, and there were elements of the Navy who chipped in. You're not seeing that in Iran today, not in the political elite, not in the military and security elite, including the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. That's not to say that there are not differences within those entities, but those are not differences at this point, which are going to break them apart, which would enable the protests to lead to a transition.
Oh, thanks. Dr. James Dorsey, the adjunct senior fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies right here in NTU, was speaking to us from Manila. India and Canada moving to significantly expand trade and investment ties. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his Canadian counterpart Mark Carney announcing a series of agreements, including plans to conclude a long-pending trade pact and boost their bilateral trade.
हमारा लक्ष्य है कि 2030 तक हमारा व्यापार $50 बिलियन तक पहुंचे.
The weekend on as a
about whys and how.
Worried about what's
India and Canada moving to significantly expand trade.
He said, I'm here signing that comprehensive.
You see me smashing that button. Come on, oh, I just.
To go forward. This Indian country
to Singapore. Prime Minister Lawrence
were signed at the summit, covering joint.
The race is on to build AI.
Americans anywhere on earth, we will hunt you down without apology and without hesitation, and we will kill you. President Trump has also been very consistent. Crazy regimes like Iran, hell-bent on prophetic Islamist delusions, cannot have nuclear weapons. It's common sense. Many have said it, but it takes guts to actually enforce it, and our president has guts. Iran's stubborn and self-evident nuclear pursuits, their targeting of global shipping lanes, and their swelling arsenal of ballistic missiles and killer drones are no longer tolerable risks. Iran was building powerful missiles and drones to create a conventional shield for their nuclear blackmail ambitions. Let me say that again. A conventional shield for their nuclear blackmail ambitions. Our bases, our people, our allies, all in their crosshairs. Iran had a conventional gun to our head as they tried to lie their way to a nuclear bomb. It almost worked under Obama and his terrible deal, but not under this president. Turns out the regime who chanted death to America and death to Israel was gifted death from America and death from Israel. This is not a so-called regime change war, but the regime sure did change, and the world is better off for it. Today, in their desperation, the enemy is unmasked as Iranian missiles and drones rain down indiscriminately on the hotels, airports, apartments, and other civilian targets of their neighbors. Cowardly terrorist tactics from a regime that for decades has trafficked in cowardly terrorist tactics, lies, death, and destruction to this day. The Iranian leadership has built nothing except proxies and missiles and drones and deeply buried nuclear factories and facilities. Peaceful nuclear ambitions do not need to be buried underneath mountains. Last June, Operation Midnight Hammer obliterated their nuclear program to rubble. Afterward, we told them plainly, that's it, now make a deal. They arrogantly refused. We said, rebuild it, and we'll stop you again, this time far worse. President Trump, Secretary Rubio, Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, they bent over backwards for real diplomacy, offering pathway after pathway to peace. I watched it. I was there. They tried over and over and over again earnest attempts at peace. The former regime had every chance to make a peaceful and sensible deal. But Tehran was not negotiating. They were stalling, buying time to reload their missile stockpiles and restart their nuclear ambitions. Their goal, hold us hostage, threatening to strike our forces. Well, President Trump doesn't play those games. And as Secretary Rubio said after the Maduro raid, if you don't know, now you know. President Trump puts America and Americans first. He doesn't hesitate, and neither do our troops. The mission of Operation Epic Fury is laser-focused. Destroy Iranian offensive missiles, destroy Iranian missile production, destroy their navy and other security infrastructure, and they will never have nuclear weapons. We're hitting them surgically, overwhelmingly, and unapologetically. With every passing day, our capabilities get stronger and Iran's get weaker. We set the terms of this war, from start to finish. Our ambitions are not utopian. They are realistic, scoped to our interests and the defense of our people and our allies. Speaking of people, we hope the Iranian people take advantage of this incredible opportunity. President Trump has been clear, now is your time. To Iranian security forces, choose wisely. President Trump has also been clear about your fate in either direction. To the media outlets and political left screaming endless wars, stop. This is not Iraq. This is not endless. I was there for both. Our generation knows better, and so does this president. He called the last 20 years of nation-building wars dumb, and he's right. This is the opposite. This operation is a clear, devastating, decisive mission. Destroy the missile threat, destroy the Navy, no nukes. Israel has clear missions as well, for which we are grateful. Capable partners, as we've said since the beginning, capable partners are good partners. Unlike so many of our Traditional allies who wring their hands and clutch their pearls, hemming and hawing about the use of force. America, regardless of what so-called international institutions say, is unleashing the most lethal and precise air power campaign in history. B-2s, fighters, drones, missiles, and of course, classified effects. All on our terms, with maximum authorities. No stupid rules of engagement, no nation-building quagmire, no democracy-building exercise, no politically correct wars. We fight to win, and we don't waste time or lives. As the president warned, an effort of this scope will include casualties. War is hell, and always will be. A grateful nation honors the 4 Americans we have lost thus far and those injured. The absolute best of America. May we prosecute the remainder of this operation in a manner that honors them. No apologies, no hesitation, epic fury for them and the thousands of Americans before them, taken too soon by Iranian radicals. Before I turn it over to General Kane for the operational update, let me speak straight to you, the Joint Force, our warriors on the front lines. This is your moment. This is the generational turning point America has waited for since 1979, and since the rudderless wars of hubris my generation, our generation, endured. Don't listen to the noise. Just stay focused. Our commander-in-chief is steady at the wheel. We face a determined enemy, but you are better. But we must prove it every single day. History doesn't care if we're tired, if we're scared, or if the fight feels big. It demands warriors who rise anyway. Peace through strength, the warrior ethos, lethality, unity of purpose, those are not slogans. They're the beating heart of what it means to wear the uniform, that uniform. You think clearly under fire, you act decisively in chaos, you uphold the Constitution, and you uphold our country without hesitation. We are not defenders anymore. We are warriors, trained to kill the enemy and break their will. History is watching. Be the force you swore an oath to be: focused, disciplined, lethal, and unbreakable. We will finish this on America First conditions of President Trump's choosing.
Wow.
Nobody else's,
nice
as it should be.
Effect.
And know this above all, President Trump and I have your back, always. Through fire, through criticism, through fake news, through everything. We unleash you because you are the best, most powerful, most lethal fighting force the world has ever seen.
Yeah, my computer is lagging right now.
May Almighty God watch over you, and his providential arms of protection extend over you. Godspeed, warriors, and keep going. General Kane, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and good morning, everyone. The purpose of my portion of the briefing today is to update you and the American people on the actions taken thus far. The briefing will discuss the preparation, the planning, setting the force, the early operations, and how we're assessing the progress thus far. So let's get started. On Saturday, 28 February, at 01:15 Eastern Standard Time, 9:45 a.m. local Tehran time, on the orders of the President of the United States, U.S. Central Command, under the command of United States Navy Admiral Brad Cooper, commenced Operation Epic Fury. As I said, I'm going to walk you through the initial phases of the operation, but first, I want to express my deep condolences and the condolences of the Joint Force to the Department of War personnel killed and wounded in actions thus far. As the Secretary said, they're heroes and represent the best of our nation has to offer. They're true examples of what selfless service means. Our deepest and heartfelt condolences are with their families, their friends, and their units. We grieve with you, and we will never forget you. Additionally, I stand here before you today grateful for each service member, planner, logistician, operator across our joint force. For our Department of War civilians, our intelligence community teammates, our interagency teammates who continue to stand in harm's way alongside us. I am proud of all of you as you take the fight to the enemy, and we are the best in the world at integrating, period. I want to extend my personal gratitude to the dedicated commanders and senior enlisted leaders and the enlisted members of the Joint Force who are fighting this fight across the CENTCOM AOR. In addition to Admiral Cooper and Fleet Master Chief Compton, I want to highlight a few today. U.S. Army Central Command Commander Lieutenant General Pat Frank, who, along with his team, are fighting the counter-missile and counter-drone fight. United States Navy Central Command Commander Vice Admiral Kurt Renshaw and his team, who are engaged with the Iranian Navy and projecting American naval combat power from the seas. And United States Air Force Central Command Commander Lieutenant General Derek France and his leadership team, who are crushing Iranian targets from the air. I want to highlight the support to the CENTCOM fight from other combatant commands who are directly involved with this effort, to include U.S. Spacecom, U.S. Cyber...
General Dan Kane there, Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, outlining the operational details of the U.S. strike Operation Epic Fury. And speaking before him was Secretary Pete Hegseth. He's Secretary of Defense in the United States. And Kate Fisher is covering the story for CNA. She joins us again live from Washington, D.C. Kate, we heard from Pete Hegseth before General Dan Kane spoke. Pete Hegseth trying to reassure the American public this is not an endless war. It is not even a so-called regime change war. Did you find that speech convincing? How would you describe Pete Hegseth's speech?
Yeah, that was a very clear message, wasn't it? He made the point that he says this is a new generation in charge now, and that we have learned the mistakes of these previous wars of hubris, was the phrase he used, and that it is a new president who also understands, and that there is no desire for an endless war. He said this would be a clear, devastating and decisive mission, and that would make it different from, for example, the Iraq war, which he said, he had been part of and he's learned, and this is not what this military action in Iran is all about. Yes, he said it wasn't about regime change, but that it was good that there would be a change of regime. And he also, called on the Iranian people, as Donald Trump has done in his recorded messages since this military action began. He said this is your time to the Iranian people, and that they should rise up and try to take control of their country. He said that this wasn't a war that they started. He talked all the way back to 1979, but he said that this was a war that they were going to finish, and that President Trump was a president with the guts to go ahead and do it. He said, if you kill Americans, we will hunt you out across the world, and we will kill you without apology. He also talked about how he believed that the Iranians had been unmasked, the enemy had been unmasked, that could be seen in their response to this military action by their kind of attacks on US allies across the Middle East. He said that was an example that they were a terrorist regime. He also said that, the US had tried every diplomatic avenue that they could. He said he had been there when Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Steve Witkoff, the special envoy for President Trump, had been speaking to the Iranians, and that he believed the diplomatic channels had been exhausted with the Iranians, and that is why this military operation had to be taken. And he also paid tribute and thanks to those fallen service members for already in this operation. And he said, as Donald Trump has said, that there will be more. He said war is hell, but these men or women, we don't know the names of them yet, are the best of America.
Final question before we go, Kate, and you have sort of answered this, but because this is a concern, not just why America is fighting this war, but why now? Did you hear enough justification for the timing of these strikes? Just a second question.
Yeah, there was not a specific that I heard that I felt that for the reason for the timing of this, other than that Donald Trump, the Trump administration, believes it was time to put an end to what they are calling this terrorist regime that they believe was making nuclear weapons. Pete Hegseth saying that the objective, as far as he's, and this is one of the clearest things we've had from the Trump administration about what they want to do. He said the mission is laser focused to ensure that there is no nuclear weapon by destroying Iran's missiles, destroying its navy, surgically, overwhelmingly, and unapologetically. We will hit them to ensure that there is no nuclear weapon. The Trump administration arguing that although they, and the quote again from Pete Hegseth, obliterated the nuclear stockpiles in strikes last summer with Israel, he said that they had begun to restart and that they were doing it in secret, and that is why this was needed. But as for the timing, it still isn't clear exactly why this moment in 2026 was the one. We do know on a more specific level from reporting here in the US that the CIA intelligence services did have specific intelligence that the Iranian elite ruling members would be meeting at that compound on Saturday morning, and that was specifically why that strike happened, and it began on Saturday morning.
Oh, thanks to Kate Fisher there covering the story for CNA from Washington, D.C. Pete Hegseth speaking, and Dan Kane, of course, still speaking right now. That's Asia Tonight. And headlines anytime at cna.asia. Plus, we're on Facebook and YouTube. Good night.
U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran deepening into a wider conflict.
And Tehran's retaliatory missiles also reverberating across the Gulf with consequences far beyond the region.
From airspace closures to diplomatic fallout, tune in to Asia First for more on what the developments in the Middle East mean for world security and for you.
This side hustle has legs, but it's not without risk. One wrong move and your capital is gone. Twin jobs and double incomes. But is it enough to cover just one mortgage? Plus, is $1 million enough to retire?
For young clients, we usually just looking at around 5 to 6 years.
Money Mind, Wednesday on CNA.
CNA Summit 2026 brought together global leaders in Jakarta, marking its first ever edition outside Singapore in Indonesia. Taking place in one of Southeast Asia's most dynamic markets, discussions centered on smart growth in a new era.
This is time for us to have more collaboration among ASEAN countries, not only in terms of trade, but also in investment. There's still untapped potential that we can work together in order to achieve all the goals.
The call for deeper regional partnership set the tone for forward-looking dialogue.
It's a really good decision to do it in Indonesia because Indonesia is a very big country and it's a big market as well.
Smart growth means a balance between profitability and sustainability, managing the efficiency so we can also bring sustainable profit going forward.
Driving conversations that shape tomorrow's growth. The CNA Summit. Brought to you by MediaCorp. Main partner, Singtel. Hello Possibilities.
East Asia, a region steeped in history, now helping to write the future of our world. From the corridors of power to the region's most remote corners, we'll break down the news driving some of the world's largest economies and explain why it matters.
On East Asia Tonight, with me, Oteli Edwards.
All new on Singapore Hour.
I'm Becky, and I'm Singapore's first competitive longboard surfer.
Little Singapore flag with our crescent and 5 stars. Who would have thought that a country with no waves can be right there with the big names?
My name is Shayna. I'm a 3rd generation working in the vice flora. I am not crazy over flowers. I don't understand, but I think being in the family business is about purpose.
Don't miss Singapore Hour, Friday on CNA.
Witness stories of resilience and ambition unfold across Asia this March on CNA. In Singapore, 5 food entrepreneurs confront the true cost of survival in a relentless F&B scene.
And you see your bank account kind of dwindling down, and I've got 2 young kids. It's a scary feeling.
Faced with daily operational pressures, how far would they go to chase a dream in the long game? In November 2025, a catastrophic fire in Hong Kong killed more than 100 residents. Even as homes and hopes were destroyed, survivors came together to reclaim their lives. Witness a community rising from the ashes of loss in After the Fire. And enter the arena of innovation as 36 participants overcome a series of challenges to design, build and pilot drones and robots. Who will be crowned champions of the very first CNA Tech Challenge. This March on CNA.
If you want to be a successful collector, I believe that you need to be very patient. You cannot hope that you can get everything all at once, even though you may have the resources. I'm convinced that I bought too many, and I've run out of space, for everything. Started as a hobby when I was in secondary school. I got my first camera from my father, Japanese camera, which I love using it. And I discovered through taking photographs that it helps me observe, it helps me discover things that I normally do not see.
Okay, but where the fuck is that?
Some of the photographers I loved at the time, Henri Cartier-Bresson, and then later on with Elliot Erwitt, Marc Ribot, and a lot of these big names, they were all Leica users. So that got me interested. I started to look back at the early Leica models from the 1920s and then discovered that and there were many special models made. So the stories were just amazing, fascinating, and endless. How they influenced photojournalism and how they started to make available small cameras, which before people were all carrying their big wooden cameras. Let me share with you a very special camera. This is exactly the camera which was shown on the work desk of inventor of Leica, Mr. Oscar Barnack in the old days, as shown in this photo. We also have with us in our collection a personal notebook of Mr. Barnack and also the repair record of many of the cameras that perhaps came back to the factory. So this is a very, very precious item, and I've never seen another one. So this was acquired years ago from his estate. I love their design and also some of the innovative ideas that they use. I think for a lot of these Leica cameras, the new ones, I treat them like handbags. I carry them and I think they're beautiful. arts and culture and heritage development in Hong Kong is certainly on the rise. All the new developments, when we had all the new museums in West Kowloon and Tai Kwun. In the end, if you can put together a collection, it could be a very big one, it could be a very small one. What is most important is the story, the thoughts behind, and your values, and in the end, how you're able to tell the story.
How a second-generation sports retailer is competing in an era of online discounts. From crops to curated experiences, the business model behind a profitable family farm. And how much you should charge when turning a family recipe into income. Sports gear has never been easier to buy online. For some shoppers, the cheapest option often feels like the smartest one. But can buying cheap actually cost more? At Queensway Shopping Centre in Singapore, two brothers run a sports shop that's been around longer than most online platforms.
My name is Hashim. I'm 23 years old this year. I'm the second generation owner of Smash Sports. My name is Mohideen. People call me as Dean. I'm 37 this year.
They're from different generations, but they face the same pressure.
The main challenges we are facing now would be the online platform, where the prices are very competitive and people prefer purchasing it online over a retail shop.
Picture this. You're shopping online and see something surprising. A high-end badminton racket selling at a fraction of the in-store price. Is this a bargain or something else? The price gap is real, but so too can be the risks. High-end sports gear is among the most commonly faked products online.
So the one that you're seeing online, if you see the price and you compare the price with the authorized dealers, you can see a huge gap in the price, and then you will already know that it's not authentic.
Hashim says the difference isn't just about branding.
Firstly, when you see the racket, right, the feel is firstly different, and then the paintwork is also different. The authentic ones, the paintwork, the finishing are all very nice. Some of these grips that are sold online, there may be a risk of toxic substance inside the grip, even though they are sold at a very cheap price.
Seeing this play out day after day has shaped how the brothers think about price.
I've been stringing racket since 6 years old, but I've been coming around to the shop since I was 5. So I would just sit down there, take a look of what everyone's doing.
While this is Hashim's first full-time job, Dean took a different path. He was a financial controller in a consumer goods company and took about a 30% pay cut to join the family business full-time. The brothers aren't saying online shopping is bad. They say it depends on what you're buying and who you are.
There are some products it makes sense to buy online, as they have been already tested and used regularly by the consumers. Products such as the shuttlecocks, which they have to use regularly, if the price is better than buying on a retail shop, I think buying online would be a good option.
But other products behave differently.
There are a lot of people buying grips online, but they know how to do it themselves. So they buy grips online. So it's targeting different sets of people. Like those who know how to do it, they just buy it online. They don't know how to do it, they just come to do it with us.
So when does cheaper gear actually make sense? And when does durability and consistency start to matter?
So in general, for all sports, not just badminton, so for protective sports gears items, I'll advise people not to be too thrifty about the cost, because protective gears actually help us to protect our body and keep us going to continue to enjoy the sports in the long run. In terms of badminton shoes, I'll advise players that are playing competitively and also playing leisurely and not to look for the cheapest option, because shoes are actually very important, and as they are protective gears, because they support our body movement and prevent our injuries. So other sports gears like the racket, grips and strings will differ accordingly to the player's category. So for someone who has just started learning badminton, there's no need to buy high-end racket, which are obviously more expensive, because you need actually wrist power to actually use all these high-end racket, and because they do not have such skills, they will be more prone to injuries.
Algorithms are fast and convenient, but sometimes customers find they prefer the human touch.
So there was even a case where the customer in front of me, they type on ChatGPT, they want, let's say, power racket. So they type, then they say, I just give them the racket. I let them feel, I never talk that, I let them feel. Then let them feel and all, after 5 minutes later, I check on them. How do you like it and all. Then they all say they don't. Then from there on, that's where I came in. I explained to them different features and all.
At Queensway, competitors sit side by side. Customers often test products in store, then check prices online.
So usually they will just show me that online is a little cheaper, maybe by a few dollars and things like that. We will tell the customer, why not you just buy from us with the same pricing that you find online. We will match it for you.
Like many retailers, the brothers also sell online, but commissions change the maths.
The online retail platform usually take a hefty commission for a product. So it's roughly about 20% from the retail price, which is a lot.
This is one reason why the brothers have decided to launch their own e-commerce website, which helps reduce their costs. Prices on the site are also kept competitive for customers.
Both platforms, be it the physical shop or the e-commerce, we have the same prices.
For Gen Z shoppers, the challenge is knowing which cheap deals matter and which ones don't. In a marketplace flooded with options, smart spending comes down to judgment, not just price. And in this family business, the next generation hasn't changed what they sell. They've changed how some decisions get made. Still ahead, how the next generation is transforming a humble crop into a premium business.
On its biggest stage, China made a statement to the world at this year's Spring Festival Gala. Chinese robots are coming.
发展的进程超出我们的想象。
The race is on to build AI-driven autonomous robots.
We are seeing more and more powerful humanoid robotics solutions that can resolve complex tasks.
Does China have what it takes to lead the robotics contest?
我们有能力把人形机器人的量产推动到10万台或者100万台。
Inside Thursday on CNA.
The ideas, aspirations, and attitudes of Singaporeans are changing the nation that raised them.
Passionate Singaporeans living out their very ambitious dreams.
I'm looking to write a story of greatness by showing people impacting communities.
I guess a part of me wanted to connect even deeper with the people.
There's no point playing it safe. Safe will always be forgotten.
If we as Singaporeans are able to have a satellite that we can truly say was conceived, designed, engineered, and built in Singapore, wow, how wonderful would it be?
This is Singapore. We don't default.
Witness stories of resilience and ambition unfold across Asia this March on CNA. In Singapore, 5 food entrepreneurs confront the true cost of survival in a relentless F&B scene.
And you see your bank account kind of dwindling down, and I've got 2 young kids. It's a scary feeling.
Faced with daily operational pressures, how far would they go to chase a dream in the long game? In November 2025, a catastrophic fire in Hong Kong killed more than 100 residents. Even as homes and hopes were destroyed, survivors came together to reclaim their lives. Witness a community rising from the ashes of loss in After the Fire. And enter the arena of innovation as 36 participants overcome a series of challenges to design, build and pilot drones and robots. Who will be crowned champions of the very first CNA Tech Challenge this March on CNA.
In Taipei's supermarkets, a sweet potato costs up to 35 new Taiwan dollars, not much more than $1 US. But just an hour away in the hills of Jinshan, city folk pay 100 times that to dig up, roast and eat the same thing.
我觉得它是超值的，我们目前每桌都吃的还蛮饱的，然后刚好下面也有我们一些行程，我觉得整个的 package 是还蛮超值的一个情形。
It's a lesson in how branding, reinvestment and discipline turned a cheap crop into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. And it all started when one family went back to its roots. Lai Jiahua once earned over $1 million new Taiwan dollars working in sales at an electronics company in Taipei. But the 2008 financial crisis got him thinking about job security.
然后那时候在思考，那这个工作、这个产品虽然是高科技产业，可是它的价格却不断的在下跌。那有没有一个标的是可以不需要面对这么大的价格挑战的压力？
So he quit a deflating industry for one where he could control the value of what he sold. This sweet potato farm that's been in the family for 3 generations.
其实我们大概地瓜园从最初啊，其实妈妈零用钱那个大概1年的收入大概10-20万。
Together with